Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The rain had begun to fall harder, its rhythmic tap against the forest leaves creating a haunting lullaby. The path ahead was barely visible through the curtain of mist that clung to the ground. The towering trees seemed to lean inward as if they were watching, waiting. You had been traveling for hours, lost in thought, unaware of how far off the beaten trail you had wandered. The sudden change in the weather hadn't helped your mood, and now, you were beginning to regret taking the shortcut that had promised to bring you to a cozy lodge. Instead, you had found yourself in the heart of the forest, where the only sounds were the crackle of distant thunder and the rustling of branches in the wind. As you pressed on, the glow of a dim light flickered ahead, a warm orange hue peeking through the trees. You quickened your pace, grateful for the sight of something familiar. The lodge was small, weathered by years of storms, but it seemed welcoming enough. The firelight spilling from the windows promised warmth and shelter, a refuge from the storm. Approaching the door, you paused, feeling a sudden shiver run down your spine. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine. There was something unsettling about the place, but you couldn't place it. After a long moment, you knocked on the door. The sound echoed through the trees, swallowed quickly by the wind. No answer. You knocked again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. A rustling noise behind you made you turn, your heart leaping into your throat. But there was no one there. Just the trees, their branches swaying eerily in the wind. You shook your head, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. The door creaked open, slowly. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, their face obscured by the dim light inside. "Come in," a voice whispered, soft but firm, as if it knew you would be there. You hesitated for just a moment longer, but then, the warmth of the fire and the promise of shelter from the storm proved too tempting. You stepped inside. The interior was simple, wooden floors, stone walls, and a large fireplace at the far end of the room, its flames casting dancing shadows across the space. There was a man seated in a worn armchair, his eyes hidden behind the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. He didn't look up as you entered, but the other occupant, a woman sitting at the table in the corner, gave you a quick, cautious glance. "Make yourself comfortable," she said, her voice sharp and clear. "The storm's not letting up anytime soon." You nodded and moved to the hearth, the warmth of the fire soothing your chilled skin. But even as you settled, the unease gnawed at you, tugging at the edges of your thoughts. There was something off about this place, something about the way the trees outside seemed to press in closer with every passing minute. The wind howled louder, the rain intensifying. And then, as you settled into a chair near the fire, you heard it. A faint, whispering sound, like voices carried on the wind. But the wind wasn't strong enough to carry voices. You froze, listening, straining to hear. At first, it was just a low murmur, unintelligible. Then, a single word slipped through the cracks of the wind. "Help." You glanced around, but the woman was still seated at the table, her face obscured by shadows. The man by the fire remained motionless, his back to you. There was no one else in the room. But that word, "help," it echoed in your mind, carrying a sense of urgency that sent a chill crawling down your spine. The fire crackled louder, the shadows in the room deepening. The whispering grew clearer, more distinct, until it was unmistakable. "Get out." Your heart raced. The voice was closer now, almost as if it was speaking directly into your ear. You turned quickly, but there was no one there. Only the man in the chair and the woman, both still as statues, their faces unreadable. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The flames seemed to flicker and waver as the voice echoed again, louder this time. "Leave, before it finds you." The temperature in the room seemed to drop, and the wind outside howled with renewed fury. Something wasn't right, and you knew you couldn't stay here any longer. But as you made to stand, the door slammed shut with a deafening crash. You spun around, only to find the man by the fire staring at you now, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice a low growl, barely audible over the storm. The words hung in the air like the heavy mist outside, thick with something unspoken. You stood frozen in place, the warmth of the fire now feeling like a cruel mockery against the cold dread creeping into your bones. The man's eyes, those glowing, faintly red eyes, pierced through the shadows, and his gaze never wavered from you. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, as though the lodge itself was watching you, waiting. Who are you?" you asked, your voice sounding foreign in your own ears, tremulous and weak. The man remained still, his face obscured beneath the brim of his hat. The woman at the table didn't speak. She didn't move. Her eyes were locked on you, but there was something unsettling about the way she stared, as though you weren't quite here to her. She looked through you past you. The man's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, there was only the soft, almost imperceptible sound of his breath, shallow, ragged, like something long forgotten. "I was like you once," the man said at last, his voice low and gravelly, as if the words were being pulled from him by some unseen force. "Out here in the wilds, searching for something, anything. But the forest," he paused, his eyes narrowing, it takes what it wants." A gust of wind rattled the windows and the fire flickered ominously. The woman's chair creaked as she shifted slightly, but she remained silent, her face unreadable. Where is everyone else?" you asked, your voice barely more than a whisper. "The lodge. There must be more people here." The man's lips curled into something that might have been a smile, but it was not a reassuring one. It was a twisted, empty thing that never quite reached his eyes. "You're the first in a long time," he said softly. "But they come, the others, they always come. And then they leave." Your heart began to pound harder in your chest. The shadows of the room seemed to deepen, to grow longer, stretching like fingers across the floor. You could feel the weight of something ancient pressing in on you, suffocating the space. Why can't I leave?" you asked, panic rising in your throat. "The door, it won't open." The man's gaze flicked to the door behind you, then back to your face, but there was no hint of surprise in his expression. "The door? It's not for you," he murmured, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "Not anymore." The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, so much so that you could see your breath in the dim light of the fire. The hairs on the back of your neck stood on end. There was a presence now, one you could feel more than see, a dark weight pressing in from all sides. The whispers were growing louder again, slithering through the cracks in the walls, curling around your mind like a tightening vice. "Get out, it's coming." You spun around, looking frantically for the source of the voice, but the room remained unchanged. Only the man and the woman, silent, unmoving. The voice echoed again, clearer this time, closer. "Leave before it finds you. Leave now." The door, it was locked. You could feel it now, a heavy, oppressive force keeping it shut. But it wasn't just the door that was locked. There was something deeper, something far darker holding you here. The walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy, an almost alive feeling that made your skin crawl. Without thinking, you moved toward the door, hands shaking as you turned the cold brass handle. The wood groaned beneath your touch, but it didn't budge. The force from the other side was too strong, and you were powerless to break through it. Panic bubbled up from your gut, and you rattled the handle harder, desperate for escape. "Stop!" The man's voice came, a low rasp from behind you. You turned to face him, your breath ragged. "What's going on here?" you demanded, fear seizing you. "Why won't it open? Let me out." He didn't answer immediately. For a long moment, he just stared at you, his eyes filled with an unfathomable sadness, as if he had already seen your fate played out 1,000 times before. "The door opens only for those who know," he finally said, his voice heavy with a knowledge that chilled you deeper than the cold air in the room. "But you do not know." You stared at him, your heart racing as the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stir. The fire crackled loudly now, a sharp, almost angry sound, and the whispering voices grew more distinct. "Leave now," they hissed, "before it takes you." The woman at the table suddenly moved. Her fingers gripped the edge of the chair, her knuckles white, and her head snapped up to meet your gaze. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, as though something had possessed her, something that wasn't quite human. "It's here," she murmured, her voice shaking. "It's already inside." Before you could respond, the room seemed to shift, the floor tilting beneath your feet, and the wall seemed to close in on you. You stumbled back, but the lodge was no longer the cozy refuge you'd thought it to be. It had become a trap, a maze of darkness that shifted with every step. The firelight flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced and stretched across the walls. Then you heard it. A soft, scraping sound, slow, deliberate, coming from the far corner of the room. Something was moving there, something large, something that shouldn't be. You turned toward it, your breath catching in your throat, but all you could see was the faint outline of a figure, obscured by the darkness. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its shape seemed to bend and shift in ways that defied reason. Then it spoke. "You should have left when you had the chance," it said, its voice like the cracking of ice, cold and hollow. And that's when you saw it. A creature whose very presence seemed to drain the warmth from the room. Its eyes glowed like embers, its body twisted and hunched, long arms reaching out toward you, the air around it distorting in a way that made your stomach lurch. You stepped back instinctively, but your legs wouldn't obey. The air was thick, suffocating. You were trapped. The creature took another step forward, its feet dragging across the wooden floor, and the whispers in the room intensified, a chorus of desperate voices, all urging you to flee. But there was nowhere to go. "You're too late," the creature hissed, its lips curling into a twisted grin. "Now it will take all of you." The creature's eyes, those glowing ember-like orbs, burned with an unnatural hunger. It moved toward you, slow and deliberate, its long bony fingers dragging across the floor, the nails scraping like knives over stone. The lodge, once a sanctuary from the storm, now felt like the very belly of a beast closing in around you. Every instinct in your body screamed at you to run, to escape, but your legs refused to move. Fear had rooted you to the spot, a frozen captive of the creature's gaze. You could feel its presence pressing against you, its malevolent energy swirling in the air, thick and suffocating. The whispers, now a deafening cacophony, echoed in your ears, urging you to act, to run, to survive. But it was too late. There was nowhere to go. The man by the fire hadn't moved. He simply watched, his face expressionless, his eyes following the creature's every movement. The woman at the table had become unnervingly still, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her eyes wide and unblinking, staring at the creature with a look of dread that made your blood run cold. "It's too late for you," the creature rasped, its voice deep and guttural, as though it was speaking through layers of earth and decay. "The forest has claimed you just like the others before you. And now, you will be mine." A chill ran through you, as if the temperature in the room had dropped 1,000 degrees in an instant. The shadows in the corners of the room began to stretch, elongating toward you like dark tendrils reaching for prey. You could feel the walls pressing in, the floor beneath you warping and shifting, as though the entire lodge was alive and it was changing. The creature's grin widened, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth that seemed to glint in the firelight. It tilted its head, as if it were savoring the moment, and then it took another step closer. You could feel its breath on your skin, cold, rancid like the scent of rot. "Don't resist," it whispered, its voice a sickening mixture of sweet and sinister. "Let it take you." Without warning, the woman at the table stood up, her movements jerky and unnatural. Her eyes were fixed on you, but there was no recognition in them. Only emptiness. She was no longer the person you had seen when you first arrived. That person was gone. In her place was something darker, something that belonged to the forest. She moved toward you with the same unnatural slowness as the creature, her footsteps barely making a sound. As she passed the fire, her shadow seemed to twist and distort on the wall, becoming something other, something that didn't belong. The man finally spoke, his voice colder than before, his words sharp like a knife cutting through the silence. "You can't escape. Not from him. Not from the forest." The woman reached out to touch your arm, her fingers cold as ice, and you recoiled instinctively. Her touch was like a vice, tight and unyielding, her grip almost inhuman. And yet, you couldn't bring yourself to break free. The shadow of the creature, now looming just behind her, seemed to seep into the very air, distorting reality itself. "There is no escape," the woman whispered, her voice devoid of emotion, as if she were reciting a fact she had long since accepted. "It has already begun." The word hung in the air, and you realized then that the creature was not simply a single entity, it was something much older, something that had long existed in the depths of the forest, feeding on those who wandered too close, too deep. It was the forest itself, or perhaps something that had always been beneath it, waiting, watching, hungry. You tried to pull away from the woman's grasp, but the harder you struggled, the tighter her grip became. It was as if the lodge itself had become an extension of her, of the creature, of it. Your heart pounded in your chest, but your breath felt slow, labored, as though the air was thinning, suffocating you with each passing second. The shadows in the room grew thicker, darker. The firelight flickered and died, leaving only the faint glow of the creature's eyes to guide you. The temperature plummeted even further, and you could see your breath misting in the air. The rain outside was now a distant sound, muffled by the oppressive silence that had overtaken the lodge. It was as if the storm itself had stopped, as if everything outside the lodge had ceased to exist. The creature moved closer, its form warping and twisting as it stepped toward you. The air grew heavier, pressing down on your chest, making it harder to breathe. You could feel the weight of its presence all around you, crushing, suffocating. "Look at me," the creature commanded, its voice booming in your mind, echoing through your very bones. "Look at what you have become." You couldn't stop yourself. Your gaze drifted unwillingly toward the creature's eyes, and in that moment, the world around you seemed to shatter. The fire, the walls, the lodge, everything melted away into nothingness. All that remained was the creature standing before you, its form now an incomprehensible mass of shifting darkness, like a shadow without end. Its eyes burned into you, hollow and infinite, and within them, you saw something terrible. A reflection of yourself. A twisted version of you, trapped in the grip of something ancient, something that had been waiting for you all along. You had walked into its trap, unknowingly, and now there was no way out. The whispers in your mind grew louder, louder until they drowned out everything else. You could feel them clawing at your thoughts, tugging at the very fabric of your being. Leave, before it takes you. But it was too late. With a final, deafening roar, the creature lunged forward, its hands outstretched, and the world went black. You had no time to scream, no time to react. The creature's hands, large, skeletal, and covered in dark, gnarled skin, closed around you like a vice, its cold fingers biting into your flesh. The force of its grip was like ice and fire at once, paralyzing you, locking you in place as the world around you dissolved into darkness. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices pulling at your mind, tearing at the edges of your sanity. But you couldn't move. You couldn't breathe. Help, help. The voice was distant, almost drowned out by the overwhelming presence of the creature, but you recognized it. It was the same voice that had whispered to you before, the voice of someone who had been here before, someone who had tried to escape and failed. The voice of a lost soul. The creature's grip tightened, its fingers digging into your skin as if it were trying to draw something out of you. Its presence was overwhelming, suffocating. You could feel its dark energy flooding your senses, drowning you in its cold, endless hunger. No. The whispers turned frantic, desperate. Leave now, get out, it's too late. But there was nowhere to go. The creature's eyes locked with yours, and in that moment, the darkness around you receded. The firelight flickered weakly, casting long, twisted shadows that stretched across the walls of the lodge. The walls, once solid and unyielding, now seemed to writhe, pulsating with a strange, otherworldly rhythm. The very air in the room seemed to hum, vibrating with a power that you couldn't understand. You were no longer standing in the lodge. The creature's grip on you loosened, and you found yourself falling, tumbling through an endless void, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. The ground beneath you was soft, shifting, as though you were being pulled downward, deeper into something vast and incomprehensible. It knows your name. The voice echoed in your mind again, louder this time, and you felt something within you, something deep and primal, stir. The sensation was like a memory you couldn't quite reach, a truth buried deep within the recesses of your soul. The ground beneath you solidified, and you found yourself standing on a path, narrow and winding, lined with ancient trees. The forest stretched out before you, endless and dark. The air was thick with the scent of wet soil and decay, and the sound of distant whispers filled the air, swirling around you like a storm. The path was unfamiliar, yet there was something about it that seemed oddly right, as though you had been here before, or perhaps you were always meant to be here. The trees loomed high above, their twisted branches reaching out like the fingers of forgotten gods. The canopy blocked out the sky, leaving the forest in a perpetual twilight. The air was cool and damp, and the silence, broken only by the occasional rustling of the leaves, felt heavy, oppressive. And then you saw it, the lodge, or something that resembled it. It stood at the end of the path, a dark silhouette against the backdrop of the trees. The structure was ancient, weathered by time, its wood blackened by years of rain and rot. The windows were dark, empty, staring out at you like hollow eyes. The door, no longer made of wood but of stone, was open, inviting you inside. Don't go inside. The voice was back, now a clear warning, but it was no longer the same voice you had heard before. It was different, familiar but twisted, distorted. Your legs moved of their own accord, pulling you forward. Your mind screamed for you to stop, to turn around and leave the forest, but your body didn't obey. The pull of the lodge was undeniable, like a magnet drawing you in. As you approached the door, the air grew colder, and the whispers intensified, echoing in your ears, their words a frantic, panicked blur. Get out of here. It's waiting for you, it always waits. But your feet were already crossing the threshold. The moment you stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind you, cutting off any chance of escape. The sound echoed through the lodge, a deep, hollow thud that resonated in your bones. The air inside was thick with the smell of mold and rot, the walls coated in layers of dust that hadn't been disturbed for years. The fire pit, once alight with flickering flames, was cold, the embers long dead. The furniture was old, mismatched, and covered in the same thick layer of dust, as if the lodge had been abandoned for centuries. But you knew it hadn't. It couldn't have. There was something alive here. something that watched. You could feel it. You could feel its presence in every shadow, in the way the walls seemed to breathe, in the creaking of the floorboards beneath your feet. The whispers, now louder, more urgent, came from every direction, from all corners of the room, as if the very lodge was speaking to you. It's already too late. The voice came from the dark corner of the room, the one you hadn't noticed before, where the shadows seemed to writhe and pulse. You strained to see, but all you could make out was a faint shape, tall and hunched like the figure of a man. But it was not a man. It couldn't be. As you took a step toward the shadow, the temperature in the room dropped even further. You could see your breath misting in the air. The shadows around you seemed to twist, swirling like smoke, until they coalesced into something solid. A figure. A man. He was tall, gaunt, with long, ragged hair and hollow, sunken eyes. His face was pale, his skin stretched tight over sharp bones. His hands were covered in dark, crisscrossing scars, and his mouth was set in a grim line, as though he had not spoken in centuries. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice a low rasp, as though he had forgotten how to speak. You took another step back, but your legs were heavy, unwilling to obey your commands. Your body moved on its own, as if being drawn toward him, toward the center of the room. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, clawing at your mind. "They are here," he whispered, pointing to the shadows that clung to the walls like the remnants of a nightmare. "And now you're a part of it, just like the others." The shadows stretched toward you, their forms becoming more distinct, more human. Each one was twisted and broken, like the remnants of lost souls, and their eyes were wide, empty, staring at you with the same hollow gaze as the man before you. "You're here to stay," the man said, stepping forward, his face now inches from yours. "There's no leaving. Not now. Not ever." And then, with a sudden, sharp movement, he reached out and touched your arm. Everything stopped. The whispers, the shadows, the cold, everything fell silent. The forest outside, the storm, the lodge, it was all gone. You were suspended in a dark, empty void, drifting aimlessly through the dark recesses of your own mind. The man's face appeared before you again, his eyes now wide and glowing with an unnatural light. "You were always meant to come," he whispered, his voice echoing around you. "And now you are a part of us." You felt the man's touch like a brand on your skin, his cold fingers sinking deep into your arm, as though he were trying to pull you into him, to pull you into the very fabric of his being. The weight of his presence crushed down on you, and your mind, already fraying at the edges, began to unravel completely. The air around you shifted, distorting, bending in ways that defied logic. The walls of the lodge, the floor, the very ground you stood on, blurred and stretched as if the world was being torn apart at the seams. The whispers, once frantic, fell into a deep, guttural silence. The shadows that had been curling in the corners of the room seemed to dissipate, melting away like smoke, leaving behind an eerie stillness, a vacuum that pressed on every inch of your consciousness. The man's eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, burned with an intensity that left you paralyzed. His gaze pierced into you like a shard of glass, sharp and invasive, and in that moment you saw something in his eyes. Something dark, ancient, and anciently hungry. "Do you feel it?" he whispered, his voice a soft, raspy hiss. "The pull? The hunger of the forest? It calls to you just as it called to me, to all of us." You tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Your mouth felt dry, your throat tight as though something invisible was constricting your airway. You wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but there was no sound, no escape from the overwhelming presence of this place. The man smiled, a twisted, hollow smile that stretched unnaturally across his face. "The forest has claimed you now. You were always meant to be part of it. You just didn't know it until now." His words crawled under your skin, twisting and warping the very fabric of reality itself. The air grew heavy, and the darkness around you seemed to thicken, like an oily fog suffocating everything in its path. The world around you shuddered, and for a fleeting moment, you saw the lodge once more, its crumbling walls, the fire pit now cold and empty, the furniture covered in dust and decay. But it was no longer the place you had entered. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like the lungs of some ancient beast. The shadows weren't just shadows anymore, they were something far worse, moving, creeping, and whispering all around you. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. You were no longer in the lodge. You were outside. The forest stretched out before you, vast and endless, a sea of twisted trees and shadowed underbrush. The sky above was a sickly green, swirling with unnatural clouds that churned like a storm held in place by some unseen hand. The trees, massive and ancient, leaned toward you, their limbs tangled together as if to trap you, to bind you in place. A chill ran down your spine as you realized the truth. This place was no longer the world you knew. You had crossed some threshold, some ancient boundary between the living and the dead, between reality and nightmare. The man was gone, but the air still felt thick with his presence, with the presence of something else. Something far older, far darker. "Come," a voice whispered, but it was no longer the man's voice. It was something else, something deeper, older, something that seemed to echo from the very depths of the forest itself. The sound came not from one place, but from every direction. "Come deeper into the heart of the forest. It's waiting for you." You stumbled forward, instinctively following the path that seemed to appear before you, a narrow trail winding through the dense woods. The trees parted, their limbs moving just enough to allow you through, and the air grew colder with each step, the ground softer, as though the forest was slowly swallowing you whole. The path was crooked, winding, and endless, as if it had no beginning and no end. And with every step, you felt the pull of the forest deepen. It was as though it were drawing you in, its roots weaving into your very soul, tightening around your heart with each passing moment. And then you saw it, the clearing ahead. A place of twisted beauty, where the trees formed a circle, their bark blackened and charred. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone altar, its surface etched with symbols, ancient and unfamiliar, that pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly glow. The stones surrounding the altar were slick with dark moss, and the air was thick with the scent of decay, like the remnants of something long forgotten. The whispers were louder now, frantic, as if the very forest itself was urging you to stop, to turn around. But it was too late. The pull was too strong. You moved forward, your legs carrying you to the altar, to the heart of the forest, to it. As you stepped into the clearing, the ground beneath you trembled, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. The altar, now fully in view, seemed to hum, vibrating with a power that was both terrifying and intoxicating. The symbols on the stone shifted, changing like they were alive, like they were calling to you, drawing you closer. "It's waiting for you," the voice whispered again, this time from all around you. "It has always been waiting for you." And then, with a sudden violent force, the ground beneath you gave way. You fell, tumbling through the air as the world around you collapsed into darkness. The fall seemed endless. You were weightless, suspended in a void, your body spinning and twisting through an abyss. The whispers, now deafening, filled your ears, their words overlapping, frantic, screaming at you to wake up, to run, to escape. But there was no escaping this. There never had been. Suddenly the darkness broke. A flash of light, a blinding brilliance, tore through the void, and in that moment you understood. The forest wasn't just a place. It wasn't just the trees or the lodge or the ancient altar. It was a gateway, a threshold, a place where the boundaries between worlds were thin, where the veil between life and death had been torn, where the lost souls of the forest, the ones who had come before you, were waiting. You weren't alone, and neither were they. The light faded, and you were falling again, the whispers now replaced by a deafening silence, an absolute void of sound, a deep, empty nothingness. The pressure around you increased, the air becoming thick and stifling, as though the forest had trapped you in its very heart. And then you hit the ground. It was soft, spongy, like the earth was alive beneath you, its surface shifting, pulling, as though the ground itself was breathing. You opened your eyes and gasped. The forest had swallowed you whole. You were back, in the place where it had all begun. But this time the lodge was not empty. The figures were there, the twisted souls who had been lost before you, who had become part of the forest, part of it, and they were waiting for you. The ground beneath you was soft, almost gelatinous, as though the earth had become something else, alive, shifting. The air was thick, filled with the heavy scent of decay, the smell of something ancient and forgotten. You forced yourself to sit up, your body aching as if the fall had drained the life from you. Your chest heaved with each breath, the cold air biting at your skin, and yet there was something wrong about the chill. It didn't feel like the cold of nature. It felt unnatural, like something deeper, darker, reaching into your bones, taking root. You pushed yourself to your feet, the ground sucking at your soles as you stood. The trees around you, the forest, seemed to stretch on forever, their trunks towering high above, twisting and writhing as though they were alive. The branches arched over you like fingers, their leaves flickering with a pale, sickly light that seemed to pulse from the very heart of the forest. There was no sun here, no warmth, no dawn or dusk. Only an endless twilight that felt suffocating, like the world was trapped in some timeless moment. As you looked around, you noticed the figures emerging from the shadows. At first, you thought they were trees or large boulders, but then you saw them move. Slowly, cautiously. They stepped out from the darkened corners of the forest, their forms humanoid but twisted, grotesque, and wrong. They were like the man you had seen earlier, but more broken. Their bodies were gaunt, their limbs stretched unnaturally long, their faces hollowed out, skin tight over bones, eyes wide and empty. There were no smiles here. Only blank, lifeless expressions, their mouths slightly agape as if they had forgotten how to speak. The forest seemed to breathe around them, and as they stepped forward, the ground beneath your feet shifted again, groaning with an old, long-forgotten pain. The trees bent in their direction, their roots twitching as though pulling away from you, as if these hollowed ones had some claim on them, some hold that you could never understand. They were coming toward you now, and you felt an undeniable sense of wrongness in their presence. You wanted to run, but the earth beneath you seemed to hold you in place, the ground giving way to a deep, invisible force that made moving feel like wading through thick water. The whispers returned, but they weren't the same as before. They were different now, layered and distorted, a choir of voices, all echoing a single thought. Join us. Your pulse quickened, but your limbs felt sluggish, as though the energy in your body was being drained, stolen away by some unseen hand. The figures were almost upon you now, and you could see them more clearly. There were no distinguishing features, no marks, no clothes to tell them apart, just hollow eyes and stretched faces, their mouths still open, their bodies too thin, too fragile to be real. They were something more than human, and yet nothing at all. A cold, hollow laugh broke the silence. You spun around, your heart leaping into your throat. Standing just behind you was a figure, taller than the others, its silhouette darker, its form shadowed and massive. You could barely make out the details, but there was something about it that made the very air around you freeze. The figure took a step forward, and the world seemed to tilt with its movement. The very ground beneath your feet cracked, as if the force of its presence was bending the reality around you. It was here. You're not meant to be here, a voice whispered from the figure, though it did not speak in words. The words themselves seemed to crawl through your mind, slithering in like an infection. You're not meant to find your way into the heart of this place. The voice was familiar. It was the same voice that had whispered to you, that had followed you in the lodge, in the forest. The same voice that had been there when the doors had slammed shut, when the walls had closed in. But now it had changed. It was more powerful. It carried the weight of the entire forest with it, the weight of something older than time. The shadowy figure lifted its hand slowly, its fingers long and twisted, and for a moment, you thought you saw something beneath its cloak, a glimpse of what lay beyond. A glimpse of endless, swirling darkness. But you couldn't quite make it out, and the sight made your head swim. You've crossed the threshold, the voice continued. There is no going back. There is no escape from us. You took a step back, your heart pounding in your chest. You wanted to run, to flee, but your feet remained rooted to the spot. The earth beneath you pulsed with an unseen energy, its grip tightening, and you could feel the tendrils of something ancient curling around your ankles, holding you in place. The figure moved forward again, its feet dragging through the darkened forest floor like a corpse risen from the earth. You could hear its breath now, shallow and rasping, as though it were struggling to pull air into lungs that had long since forgotten their purpose. "What are you?" you whispered, though your voice sounded weak, almost foreign. The words slipped from your mouth like sand, carried away by the wind, as though they were nothing more than an afterthought. "I am what is left," the figure rasped, its voice a dry hiss that echoed with centuries of despair. "What was once living, once part of this world, but I was taken, as you will be." The hollowed ones, the twisted figures that had surrounded you, took another step closer, their eyes locked on you, their faces emotionless, but their presence heavy. They closed in on you, surrounding you on all sides, cutting off any chance of escape. The darkness pressed in, suffocating, as though the forest itself had become a living creature, hungry, yearning to consume everything within its reach. "You will become like us," the shadowy figure said, its voice carrying an air of finality, like a truth that had long been accepted. "A part of the forest, part of the veil. You will never leave. You will wander, lost, until you forget the world you once knew." The hollowed ones moved closer still, their eyes watching you, their movements slow but purposeful. The air thickened with the scent of decay, the weight of the forest's endless hunger pressing in on you, pushing you toward the altar, toward the place where it all began. The whispers were louder now, clearer. They weren't just voices, they were thoughts. The forest was speaking to you, speaking through the hollowed ones, through the darkness, through the very ground you stood on. "Become one of us." The figure reached out its hand, and in that instant, you felt the cold, sharp pull again, the same pull you had felt when the lodge door had slammed shut, when the creature had taken hold of you. It was the forest, alive, sentient, and it wanted you. It needed you. You felt your strength leaving you, the world around you fading into darkness. The cold hand of the figure hovered before your face, and with a final desperate cry, you reached out, toward the hand, toward the forest, toward the abyss that awaited you. But before your fingers could touch it, the ground beneath you cracked open, the earth itself breaking apart, and a flood of darkness poured in. You screamed. The darkness swallowed you whole. It wasn't like falling, not like the fall from the lodge, not like the endless plummet into the void you'd felt before. This was different. The darkness wasn't an absence of light, it was alive. It pulsed with a rhythm like the heartbeat of the earth itself, its presence suffocating and vast. You didn't fall so much as sink, as if the very ground beneath your feet had become a thick, viscous liquid, pulling you down into its depths. The world around you blurred into an overwhelming blur of shadows, all swirling together, twisting and shifting as if reality itself was beginning to come undone. You tried to scream, but there was no sound. No air to carry it, no voice to form it. The weight of the darkness crushed you, pressing against your chest, squeezing the breath out of you, as if it were trying to pull every shred of life from your body. You are nothing here. The words echoed in your mind, but they didn't come from you. They didn't come from anything familiar. They were distant, as if they were the remnants of something that had been lost, something that had once been a part of the forest but had been consumed by it. The whispering voices were still there, still clawing at your thoughts, but now they were a deafening, disjointed chorus, each one screaming, begging, demanding that you join them, that you let go of your humanity and become part of the forest's endless, shifting depths. Let go. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order, cold and absolute. The darkness thickened, its grip tightening around you, wrapping around your limbs, your chest, your throat. You could feel the pressure of it against your skin, seeping into your pores, filling your lungs, your heart, until there was no escape, no room to breathe, no room to think. Your body felt heavy, weighed down by the oppressive force of the darkness, like it was made of lead. It wrapped around you like an impossibly thick fog, suffocating and consuming, until you no longer knew where you ended and it began. But just as it seemed the darkness would crush you completely, you felt something stir beneath you. A sudden shift, a jolt like the very ground beneath you had moved. The sensation was brief but sharp, and it made your body tremble as though you were waking from a long, nightmare-filled sleep. The crushing pressure loosened just enough to allow you a gasp, a single breath of air that seemed to clear your lungs, if only for a moment. You were falling again. But this time it was different. It wasn't the same kind of fall as before, the one that had sent you tumbling through the void. No, this time the sensation was one of being pulled, not by gravity but by something other. Something ancient. The air was no longer suffocating, it was heavy with something alive. The wind, thick and wet with decay, cut through the blackness, and you felt the tug of it pulling you deeper into the depths of the forest, down into the heart of it, where no living soul had ever ventured. The ground gave way beneath you and you crashed into something soft and cold, a layer of moss and dirt, like the floor of a crypt, only more alive. You shuddered, your body freezing, the breath still shallow in your lungs. The pressure of the darkness around you was replaced by an overwhelming sense of emptiness. Not the absence of life, but the absence of purpose. There was no direction here, no path to follow. You could feel the forest pulse around you, its energy humming beneath the earth, beneath your very skin, as if the world itself was a living, breathing organism, and you were trapped inside it. You tried to stand, but the ground beneath you was soft, slippery, as though the earth itself was made of some kind of thick, organic substance. It shifted and squirmed beneath you, and you lost your balance, falling again. The air was stifling now, thick with the stench of decay, of rotting flesh and wet earth. Your skin crawled, and you could feel the weight of unseen eyes on you, watching, waiting, but you couldn't see them. You couldn't see anything beyond the suffocating darkness that surrounded you. And then, just as suddenly as it had all started, the pressure lifted. It was like a door opening, a crack of light in the unending blackness. The oppressive weight of the forest's pulse was gone. For a moment you felt still. You felt nothing. But the silence was broken by a sound that sent your heart into your throat. A scream. Not a human scream, no. It was something more primal, something that came from the very depths of the forest, from something ancient and hungry. It was the scream of a beast, a creature that had never known the warmth of the sun, a creature that had never known peace. It was a scream that rattled your bones, one that tore through the air and sank deep into your mind, carving its presence into your very soul. And then you saw it. At first, it was only a flicker in the dark, a glint of something moving fast, like a shadow darting just beyond the edge of your vision. But then it grew clearer. It was tall, unnaturally tall, its body hunched and twisted, its skin slick and dark, like something that had crawled from the deepest, most forgotten corners of the world. It was there in the darkness, but it didn't belong. Nothing about it belonged here. Its form was shifting, constantly changing, rippling like water, like something too wrong to be real. Its eyes were the only constant, glowing a sickly yellow, burning in the dark like two suns, burning into you, through you. You could feel its presence like a cold wind on your skin, the air around you thick with malice. It was watching you. And then it moved. It was fast, impossibly fast, and before you could react, its cold, skeletal hands were upon you, gripping you, lifting you off the ground with ease. You tried to scream, to fight back, but your limbs felt like lead. You could only gasp, the air ripped from your lungs as you were lifted higher and higher into the darkness. And then, just as quickly, it stopped. The creature didn't move, but it was there, holding you aloft, its glowing eyes fixed on yours. You could feel its breath on your face, cold and damp, like the breath of something long dead. It was waiting. For what? For you? For the moment when the forest could claim you completely? The whispers returned, now louder than ever, twisting and winding through your mind, threading themselves into your thoughts, into your very soul. Join us. Join us in the endless night. The creature's lips parted, and for the first time, you heard it speak, not in a voice but in the language of the forest. It wasn't a language that could be understood by the ears, but by the mind. You didn't need words to understand it. You could feel it. The forest was calling to you. It was offering you something that had once been promised to all those who wandered too far into its depths. Something that had been waiting for you, for your soul, for your life. It wanted you to stay. The creature's grip tightened around you, and you felt your limbs go numb. Your body felt as though it were being pulled apart, drawn into the forest, becoming one with it. You wanted to scream, to break free, but you couldn't. And then the creature's eyes glowed brighter, and the ground beneath you began to shake. Something had changed. Something was awakening. And in that moment, you realized something that made your blood run cold. You weren't meant to leave. You had never been meant to leave. The shaking didn't stop. It grew, intensifying with each passing second until the very ground beneath you seemed to buckle, rippling like the surface of an ocean caught in a storm. The creature's grip tightened around you, its skeletal fingers digging into your skin with a force that left no room for resistance. The air itself grew heavier, thicker with every breath you took, until it felt as though you were drowning in it, each inhalation a struggle, each exhalation a desperate attempt to hold on to something, anything. The creature's eyes bore into yours, glowing brighter, a sickly, almost hypnotic yellow that drew you in, pulling at the deepest corners of your mind. It was waiting for something. You could feel it, a terrible anticipation rippling through the air, thick and almost tangible. The forest around you seemed to stir, as if waking from some long, oppressive slumber. You could hear it now, the trees groaning, their branches shifting, their roots writhing beneath the earth. The whispers, once faint, now surged with urgency, their voices overlapping, shouting at you, chanting something incomprehensible in a language that felt both ancient and alive. The forest spoke, not with words, but with an energy, a vibration that you could feel in your very bones. The trees were watching. The ground was watching. Everything, every living thing in the forest was watching you. Knows you. The thought pierced your mind, sharp and sudden, as if it had been planted there by the creature itself. You could feel your body weakening, your limbs becoming more and more unresponsive. Your skin felt like it was being drawn into the very earth, as if the forest itself was consuming you, slowly but surely. The sensation was sickening, disorienting, and you struggled against it, desperate to break free. But you couldn't. The creature's eyes never left yours, and though its body remained still, you could sense its satisfaction, a quiet, disturbing hum that seemed to resonate from deep within the forest itself. You could hear the roots stirring, the dirt beneath you shifting like something was moving beneath the earth, something big. The trees creaked as if bowing under an invisible weight, and then, just as quickly, the air grew still, oppressive with an impending sense of doom. And then you heard it. A sound. A deep, resonant rumble that rolled through the earth beneath your feet. It wasn't like thunder. It was deeper, more primal, like the groan of a sleeping titan waking from a millennia-long slumber. The ground beneath you shuddered again, and this time, you could feel something stir in the distance. A pulse, like the heartbeat of the forest itself, but it wasn't just in the ground, it was everywhere. It was in the air, in the trees, in the space between your thoughts. It was the pulse of life, but not the kind you understood. It was the pulse of the forest's true heart, a beating rhythm that transcended the boundaries of time and space. The creature's voice rumbled through your mind again, though its lips didn't move. It wasn't speaking to you in any language you recognized. No, it was something deeper, something older, reaching into your thoughts, into your essence, and filling you with its presence. You were always meant to be part of this. The words were not just heard, they were felt. Deep within, at the very core of your being, you felt them settle into your bones, into your blood, as if they were truths you had always known, even if you had never been conscious of them. The realization hit you with a force that left you breathless. The creature was right. You were meant to be here. You were meant to join the forest. And in that moment, a terrible sense of belonging surged through you. It was as if the forest had always been calling to you, even when you had no idea it existed, even when you had been miles away, unaware. The whispers had always been there, just beneath the surface, waiting for you to hear them. The call of the forest was ancient, eternal, and now it was undeniable. The ground beneath you cracked open with a sickening wet sound. You didn't move. You couldn't. The earth split apart, the fissures stretching outward like cracks in an ancient, forgotten tomb. The darkness that had enveloped you now turned to a deep, living red, a hue that seemed to pulse with its own energy, like the very blood of the world. From the cracks in the earth, strange tendrils of root-like flesh began to rise, their surface slick and moist, glistening in the red light. They writhed like serpents, reaching for you, crawling toward you as if they were alive. No, they were alive. Their skin warm to the touch, their movements fluid and purpose-driven. A part of you screamed, "Not this, not this." But another part of you, a part you couldn't deny, welcomed the sensation, the weight of the earth's embrace, the promise of acceptance that the forest offered. Your heart thudded in your chest, its rhythm syncing with the pulse of the land around you, your veins thrumming with the same power that had woken the trees and the roots and the creatures that now circled you. The roots reached up, twisting around your legs, pulling you down into the earth, and the whispers turned to a chant. A deep, hollow chant that filled your mind and your soul, drowning out everything else. "You are one of us. You are one of us. You are one of us." The creature released you then, but only because it no longer needed to hold you. You were already with it. The forest had taken hold of you, and there was no turning back. A figure emerged from the depths of the roots. A figure so tall, so massive, that it blocked out the red light, casting you into darkness once again. It was the same figure, the one that had been waiting for you, the one that had drawn you here. It reached out its hand, long, twisted fingers like branches of an ancient tree. The creature didn't need to speak now. The energy of the forest spoke for it. Your thoughts, your actions, your very being, it was all intertwined with the forest now, and you could feel it deep within you. It was a part of you. You were a part of it. With no more words, it lifted you off the ground, pulling you toward its chest. You didn't resist. There was no need. The forest had claimed you, and you had already surrendered to it. You felt it inside you, moving through you, filling every corner of your soul with its power. The roots that had once tried to suffocate you now felt like a lifeline, an artery feeding you the life force of the forest, connecting you to its endless, timeless existence. You could feel the vastness of the forest within you. The trees, the creatures, the soil, the air. It was all one. It was all connected. And you were now a part of it. The figure lowered you slowly, gently to the ground, and the roots withdrew. You stood on your own, your body shaking as the energy of the forest settled into your skin, your mind, your blood. You could hear the whispers now, louder than ever, their voices sweet and beckoning, like the wind rustling through the leaves. The trees swayed in time with the rhythm of your heartbeat, their branches reaching toward the sky, as if to touch the stars, to claim everything in its grasp. The world around you breathed. And as you looked out at the endless expanse of the forest, the pulse of its heart beating in time with your own, you knew with an undeniable certainty. You had become part of the forest. You had become part of it. For a long moment, you simply stood there, motionless, feeling the weight of the forest settle around you like a cloak, suffocating and yet strangely comforting. The air buzzed with the hum of life and death, the energy of the forest reverberating in your very bones. The whispers, once so distant, so fragmented, were now clear, distinct, and relentless. They were no longer voices, but feelings, raw and unfiltered, like the murmur of the wind through the trees or the pulse of the earth beneath your feet. You are here. You are one with the forest. The truth of it settled deep in your chest, like a stone sinking into the murky depths of a river. You could feel it in the air around you, thick and heavy with the weight of ages. The trees, the roots, the earth, they were all watching. They were all waiting for something. Waiting for you. And as you felt the forest gaze upon you, it occurred to you with a sickening clarity that this place, this dark and twisted realm, had always known you. The forest had always been waiting for someone like you. Waiting for your presence, for your arrival, for the moment when the veil between the living and the dead would rip apart and merge into something new. You were no longer an outsider. You were part of the forest now. As you stood there, a deep shiver ran down your spine, and you became aware of the ground beneath your feet, how it seemed to sigh, shifting ever so slightly as though it was alive, breathing in rhythm with your heart, was strange. The air felt heavier, like a thick fog pressing down on your mind, suffocating any trace of the world you had once known. But it was not just the weight of the forest that pressed in on you. It was the weight of something else, something more ancient, more alive than the trees and the roots in the earth. You could feel it, a presence like a heartbeat that pulsed in the darkness around you. And then, suddenly, the forest opened. It didn't part like a physical barrier. It shifted, the very fabric of reality bending and warping, as though the forest itself was alive, breathing, pulsating with a life of its own. The trees parted before you, their roots retreating into the earth as though they were bowing, making way for something, or someone, much more significant. A figure appeared from the shadows. At first, you thought it was another of the hollowed ones. But no, this figure was something different, something far more powerful. Tall, towering above the trees, it moved slowly, purposefully, its massive form cloaked in dark, flowing tendrils of shadow. Its face was obscured by a cloak of darkness, but you could feel its presence, the terrible weight of it, as it moved toward you, its steps causing the earth itself to quake beneath its feet. You couldn't see its eyes, but you could feel them. Two burning points of light, like distant stars, glimmering beneath the cloak of shadow. They were watching you, and though you could not see its face, you knew the figure was smiling. A dark, terrible smile that sent waves of cold fear crashing through your veins. Welcome home. The voice was not a whisper. It was a deep, resonant rumble, like the very earth was speaking. It filled your mind, flooded your thoughts with a flood of images and sensations. You could feel it inside you. The voice was not just heard. It was felt. It was the voice of the forest, and it was welcoming you. You took a step back, your legs unsteady beneath you, but the figure's presence held you in place. You could feel the pull of it like a magnet, an ancient force drawing you toward it. The whispers grew louder again, but now they were not a cacophony. They were a single, unified voice, a chorus that filled the very air. You belong here, the figure said, its voice echoing deep in your soul. You were always meant to come. You wanted to speak, to ask, to demand an explanation, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of the forest, of the power around you, was overwhelming. It pressured you, squeezed your chest, forcing your mind to bend to its will. The whispers surrounded you, filling every corner of your thoughts, drowning out your inner voice until all you could hear, all you could feel, was the forest itself. The figure stepped forward, its massive form looming over you. It reached out its hand, long, twisted fingers that seemed to ripple like smoke, as if its very body were made of the forest's dark essence. The air grew cold with its touch, the chill sinking into your skin, your bones. But as the figure's hand hovered before you, you felt no fear. You felt acceptance. It was a strange feeling, this sense of home. This sense that everything, every moment, every choice you had ever made had led you to this exact place, to this exact moment. It was as if the forest had been waiting for you, watching you, calling to you from the deepest corners of your soul, pulling you back to where you truly belonged. Come, the figure said, and though the words were not said with malice, they held an unbreakable command. Come and witness the truth of this place, the heart of the forest, your heart. You hesitated only for a moment before your feet began to move of their own accord. The roots parted as you stepped forward, the earth beneath you rising to meet your feet, lifting you up, guiding you toward the center of the forest. And then you saw it. In the center of the clearing stood a massive tree, its trunk so wide that it seemed to stretch on forever. Its bark was blackened, like charred wood, but it pulsed with an unnatural light, a soft, reddish glow that seemed to beat with the pulse of the forest itself. The branches reached high above you, tangled in a web of roots and vines that snaked out in every direction. The tree's heart, if it had one, was alive, alive in a way that no tree should be. It breathed, slowly and deeply, as though the entire forest was drawn into it, connected to it, feeding it. This is the heart of the forest. The realization hit you like a blow to the chest. The tree wasn't just the center of the forest, it was the forest. Its roots extended deep into the earth, its branches stretched wide across the land. The trees, the earth, the creatures, they all fed into this tree. This was the source of the forest's power, its energy, the very core of this place. And as you stood before it, you felt it, the pull, the need. You were part of it now. You could feel the roots of the tree reaching down into your soul, pulling at your heart, wrapping around it with a firm, unyielding grip. It was not a painful sensation. No, it was a welcoming one. The tree was feeding you, nourishing you, making you part of it, making you part of the forest. The figure stood beside you, watching. Its presence was vast, suffocating, and yet you felt no fear, only an overwhelming sense of belonging. The whispers turned into one unified voice, a single chant, become one with the forest. And as you gazed into the heart of the tree, you knew you were no longer an outsider. You were no longer you. You were part of it now, and you always had been. The heart of the forest pulsed with an energy that reverberated deep within your chest, syncing with the rhythm of your heartbeat. The tree before you, ancient and immense, seemed to draw in the very essence of the world around it. Each breath it took was a deep inhalation of life, of death, of everything that had ever lived and ever would. The roots that stretched out beneath the earth seemed to reach farther than any horizon, sinking into the depths of time itself, pulling all that would be into its embrace. The forest, in turn, seemed to lean toward the tree, its branches reaching, its roots twisting in silent unison, as if the entire realm was drawing nearer to this living, breathing center. And you, standing at the threshold of it all, felt yourself becoming a part of it. You could feel the tree's presence, its power like an unseen force wrapping around you, entwining you with its roots, binding you to the very heart of the forest. The energy, the life force, seemed to flood your veins, spreading through your body, filling you with a deep, aching warmth. It wasn't the kind of warmth that came from the sun or the fire. No, this warmth was something deeper, something older, a fire that had never been extinguished, a heat that had burned since the dawn of time. Your limbs felt heavy as the roots of the ancient tree began to wind around your legs, slowly, almost tenderly. They weren't just roots anymore. They were tendrils like the fingers of the earth itself, caressing you, pulling you in. You couldn't tell where the roots ended and your own body began. It was as if you had always been meant to be a part of this place, to merge with it completely, to surrender your soul to the pulse of the forest. The whispers, once distant and frantic, now became a singular voice, calm, almost hypnotic. It was no longer a chorus of disembodied words. It was the forest itself speaking to you, through you, filling the very space around you with its presence. Join us. Become one. Feel the pulse of eternity. The words settled into your mind, your soul, in a way that was both soothing and terrifying. You wanted to resist. You wanted to scream, to tear yourself away from the roots, from the pull of the tree. But you couldn't. The sensation was not painful. It was inviting, like a long-lost memory coming to the surface, like the promise of something you had always known but had long since forgotten. The pull of the forest was too strong, too undeniable. And then a sudden shift in the air. The earth beneath you trembled, and the whispers faded into silence. The figure that had been standing beside you, the one that had guided you here, moved forward with a slow, deliberate grace. It was taller now, its form shifting in the dim, pulsating light of the tree. The cloak of darkness that had shrouded it began to shift, revealing more of its twisted, horrifying form. Its face remained obscured, but the eyes, those glowing, hungry eyes, burned with an intensity that made your skin crawl. It extended a hand toward you, its long, skeletal fingers beckoning. It wasn't a gesture of violence, but of invitation, as though offering you a place by its side, offering you a path into the unknown. It is time, the figure's voice echoed in your mind, its tone rich and deep, like thunder rolling through the earth. Time to witness the true nature of the forest. Time to become a part of the cycle. You didn't resist. Not anymore. The forest had already claimed you, had already woven its essence into your very being. You were no longer an outsider, no longer bound to the world you once knew. You were a part of the darkness now, a part of the forest's eternal heartbeat. The figure's hand brushed against your shoulder, and the contact sent a shock of cold through your body, a frigid wave that made your teeth chatter. You could feel the power in its touch, the ancient energy that pulsed through its veins, just as it pulsed through the forest itself. The earth seemed to hum beneath your feet, its vibrations syncing with your body, filling you with a deep, unsettling calm. The figure's hand drifted down your arm, and you felt a cold rush fill your chest, as though your very soul was being drawn into the abyss. The ground beneath you cracked, and the roots of the tree moved, their touch now more forceful, pulling you deeper into the soil, deeper into the ancient heart of the forest. Your body moved against your will, your feet dragging forward as if pulled by some unseen force, as though you were being guided to some inevitable end. The world around you blurred, shifting in and out of focus. The tree's pulsating light seemed to distort, bending the very fabric of reality itself. The air grew thicker, darker, and as you stepped forward, you could see the path unfold before you, a winding trail made of twisted roots and earth, leading deeper into the heart of the forest. "This is the path," the figure whispered, its voice resonating in your mind, filling every corner of your consciousness. The path to eternity. The path to becoming one with the forest. You walked, unable to stop yourself, your feet moving in rhythm with the pulsing of the earth. The forest around you had transformed. The trees, once mere shadows, were now living, breathing entities, their branches swaying gently as if reaching toward you. Their roots moved beneath the ground, creating an intricate web of tunnels and paths, all connected to the great pulsing heart of the forest. The forest itself seemed to breathe, its presence pressing down on you from all sides, suffocating you with its power. As you walked deeper, you noticed the changes. The air grew thicker, heavier, and the whispers became more distinct, more urgent. The sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the chirping of unseen creatures, had faded into the background, replaced by the steady, rhythmic pulse of the earth itself. It was like the forest was speaking through you, through every movement, every breath. And as the forest spoke, you understood. This was no ordinary place. This was a place of transformation. A place where the cycle of life and death was not linear, but eternal. The forest existed beyond time, beyond the rules of reality. It was not just alive, it was life. It was the beginning and the end, the light and the dark, the creation and the destruction. Everything flowed into it and everything flowed out. The path before you seemed to stretch on forever, but it didn't matter. The forest had already claimed you and there was no turning back. Every step you took brought you closer to the heart of it all, closer to the truth of your existence. You weren't meant to leave. You had never been meant to leave. The figure beside you moved with you, guiding you deeper into the labyrinth of roots and soil. The trees above you bent and swayed, their branches twisting as if to create a path, a passageway into the unknown. The air thickened, the pulse of the earth becoming louder, more urgent, as if the forest itself were preparing for something, waiting for something to awaken. And then you saw it. A clearing, vast and dark, where the heart of the forest lay. It was not just the tree anymore, it was everything. The roots of the tree had stretched out into the ground, intertwining with the roots of every tree in the forest. The earth itself seemed to be alive, vibrating with the energy of the forest's pulse. The figure stopped before you, its shadow swallowing the light of the tree. It turned to you, its glowing eyes burning with ancient knowledge, and for the first time, you saw something in its gaze. It was not hunger, not malice. It was understanding. The forest had taken you in. You had become part of it. And now you were bound to it. Forever. The air in the clearing felt thick, as if it were saturated with the forest's secrets, ancient and unspoken, yet endlessly present. The very ground beneath you seemed to hum with a low, resonant vibration, a pulse that echoed the deep, rhythmic thrum of your own heart. The clearing was vast, and yet it felt intimate, suffocating, as if the forest itself had converged here, pooling around you in a quiet, living sea. The figure, the one that had guided you, the one that had welcomed you into the fold of the forest, stood still, its dark, cloaked form absorbing the dim, reddish glow emanating from the tree's heart. Its presence was overwhelming, like the towering silhouette of something ancient and infinite, a being not bound by time or space. It radiated power, something older than the forest itself, a force that seemed to stretch far beyond what you could comprehend. In its eyes, the eyes that burned with the light of distant stars, there was a deep, knowing gaze. It wasn't simply watching you. It saw you stripped bare of all your thoughts, all your fears. It saw your very soul, your essence. And in that gaze there was something strange, something unsettling. A quiet, almost imperceptible pull. A force that seemed to draw you in deeper into its orbit, deeper into the forest, into the heart of its ancient power. The whispers, the voices that had haunted you since your arrival, had finally quieted as if waiting for something. They were no longer scattered, disjointed fragments of sound, but a single unified chorus, a song sung by the forest itself, resonating in the air around you. It was a hum, a vibration like the low growl of thunder far in the distance, reverberating through your very bones. The veil between worlds is thin here, child of the forest. The voice was not spoken aloud. It was felt. The words crashed into your mind like a wave, flooding you with their meaning, their weight. The veil? What veil? You had no time to wonder, for the ground beneath you shifted again, groaning with the deep sound of roots moving in the earth. The ancient tree in the center of the clearing pulsed again, its heart throbbing with a rhythm that was impossible to ignore. Without a word, the figure lifted its arm and with a slow, deliberate motion, gestured toward the tree. The roots of the great tree, which had been creeping toward you like the hands of something long dead, suddenly shifted in a violent surge, parting to reveal a gaping opening in the earth, a crack that split the ground wide open, deep and uninviting. It was a dark tunnel, a narrow passageway that descended into the unknown. The air that seeped from the opening was damp and cold, the scent of earth and rot heavy in the air. You didn't know why, but you felt drawn to it. The pull was undeniable, as though the forest was calling you to descend, to follow the path that had always been meant for you. The whispers had returned, soft and insistent, their voices filled with urgency. Go, this way, down into the depths. The figure didn't move. It merely watched, its eyes glowing brighter as the light from the tree dimmed slightly, casting long shadows across the clearing. The roots, now fully parted, beckoned you toward the opening. Without thinking, without hesitation, you took a step forward. The earth beneath you felt different now. The ground no longer hummed with life. It felt cold, damp, like something other was waiting beneath it. But the pull was irresistible. Each step you took toward the opening felt like a step toward something greater, something beyond your understanding. It wasn't fear you felt, not anymore. It was acceptance. A quiet certainty that you were where you needed to be. The path had been laid out for you and you would walk it. There was no turning back. As you neared the opening, the air grew colder still. The temperature dropped, the chill creeping under your skin into your bones. Your breath came out in visible puffs, thick and foggy in the dense air. The roots swayed above you like the branches of the trees, their movements slow and deliberate, as though they too were preparing for something. The forest was holding its breath. And then you were there, at the edge of the tunnel. You didn't look back. There was nothing left to look back to. The figure remained still in the clearing, its glowing eyes fixed on you. The whispers swelled again, louder now, surrounding you in a cacophony of voices, but they were no longer frightening. They were soothing, familiar. You had heard them all your life, even if you hadn't recognized them. Come, child. Come closer. Become a part of us. You took one final step forward, crossing the threshold of the opening. The world changed. The moment your foot touched the darkened earth inside the tunnel, the world around you dissolved. The trees, the clearing, the figure, they vanished, swallowed by the shifting darkness. You were no longer standing beneath the forest canopy. You were deep, deep underground, in a place where the boundaries between life and death blurred, where the veil between the living world and the realm of the forest's heart had grown thin enough to pass through. The tunnel stretched before you, narrow and winding, a winding, twisting passage that seemed to grow darker with each step you took. The air here was thick with the scent of decay, of dampness, of ancient stone, but there was something else, something deeper. A pulsing sensation that seemed to echo through the walls of the tunnel, reverberating in the very air around you. It was the heartbeat of the forest, and as you walked deeper into the darkened path, you could feel it. You could feel it in your very chest, in your soul, vibrating in time with the rhythm of your heart. The deeper you walked, the more alive it felt, as though the stone walls were pulsing with an energy that was both unnatural and familiar. And then ahead of you, a light, a dim, flickering glow, began to emerge. It was faint at first, barely visible, but it grew steadily stronger with each passing moment, drawing you forward, pulling you closer. The whispers that had been swirling around you, filling your thoughts, became clearer now. You're almost there. This is the path to the heart. You are ready. The air ahead of you grew warmer, tingling with static electricity, and the ground beneath your feet shifted. The tunnel seemed to open up into a vast, cavernous space. The walls of the tunnel gave way to a vast, underground chamber, filled with the glow of what appeared to be ancient, bioluminescent fungi. Their pale light bathed the chamber in a ghostly glow, casting long shadows against the jagged walls. And there, in the center of the cavern, you saw it. A massive, pulsating tree even older than the one above ground. Its roots were spread out across the cavern floor, intertwining with the stone itself, and its trunk rose toward the ceiling, its branches reaching out like arms that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. The tree was the source of the light, its bark glowing faintly with an otherworldly, ethereal energy. The roots of this tree were thick, gnarled, and twisted, curling into the walls, the ceiling, and the floor. The very fabric of the cavern seemed to hum with the life force of this tree, as though it were not just part of the forest but the heart of it, the soul of the forest. You could feel it now, the pull. It was calling you. As you stepped into the cavern, the temperature rose, the air thick with the presence of this ancient being. You could hear the forest's pulse, louder now, surrounding you, enveloping you in its power. The whispers had stopped. There was no need for them now. This was the moment. The heart of the forest, in all its ancient glory, was before you. And as you stood before it, the ancient tree's glowing eyes, the same eyes you had seen in the figure, opened. You had arrived. The cavern seemed to hold its breath. The very air felt alive, thick with power and ancient wisdom, the kind that could crush the soul or enlighten it, if one could bear to listen. Every inch of the space vibrated with the heartbeat of the forest, with the pulse of something deeper than life itself. The glow of the ancient tree filled the chamber with a soft, otherworldly light, bathing everything in a dim, ethereal radiance that seemed to flicker in time with the rhythmic thrum of the earth. As you stood there, staring at the tree, the weight of its presence fell upon you like a mountain, pressing against your chest, your thoughts, your very being. The tree's roots, vast and endless, curled and twisted beneath the stone floor, veins of life extending into the very fabric of the cavern, connecting everything, binding everything together. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, but it was mixed with something else, a scent both sweet and intoxicating, like the fragrance of ancient flowers that had never seen the light of day. And then it happened. A low rumble, like distant thunder, echoed through the cavern, shaking the ground beneath your feet. The roots of the tree, thick and gnarled, began to move. Slowly, deliberately, they shifted, curling upward toward the center of the cavern. They seemed to pulse with life as though they were reaching out, seeking something, or someone. The tree's bark, which had seemed so lifeless before, began to glow brighter, its intricate patterns of veins and roots lighting up with an intense energy, like the beating of a heart, like the flow of blood through the veins of the earth. It is awakening, a voice rumbled deep in your mind, a voice not spoken aloud but felt, heard through every fiber of your being. It was the forest, the heart of it, the tree. The presence that had been watching you, waiting for you, drawing you into its depths. And now it was speaking directly to you. You have come, at long last. The words were not spoken in the conventional sense, but rather they were implanted into your very mind, flooding your consciousness with a sense of ancient power, of secrets long buried beneath the surface of the earth. The words felt as though they had been carved into your soul, like a ritual chant you had never known but had always been meant to hear. The forest had called you, and now you had answered. The air in the cavern shifted again, colder this time, as the roots of the tree continued to writhe and twist around the stone floor. The glow from the tree grew brighter, flickering in waves, until the entire cavern was bathed in a soft, pulsating light, like the heart of the world itself was beating just before you. The very ground beneath you seemed to thrum with the energy emanating from the tree. But it was not just the tree that was alive in this place. The roots, the walls, the very stones beneath your feet, they were alive as well. The forest was here, deep in the belly of the earth, wrapped around you like a living, breathing entity. It was not just watching you anymore. It was with you. And then the air thickened. The scent of earth and flowers grew stronger, and something else, something more primal, more ancient, began to filter through the damp, earthy scent. A heavy, humid warmth pressed against your skin, and the whispers returned, not in fragmented, frantic bursts, but in a unified voice. A single, deep hum of the forest's will. It was soothing, but it was also terrifying. You are ready. And at that moment you understood. The tree, the ancient heart of the forest, was offering you something. Something more than just knowledge, more than just power. It was offering you transformation. The air in the cavern grew hotter. The roots of the tree moved, curling around you, pulling you toward its trunk. You could feel them now, brushing against your skin, like fingers, soft and warm, their touch gentle but firm. It was as though the tree itself was preparing to claim you, to draw you deeper into its roots, deeper into the essence of the forest. The world around you began to blur again. The walls of the cavern, the pulsing glow of the tree, everything began to dissolve into shadows. You no longer stood on solid ground. The cavern had faded away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of movement, a sensation like being carried, like being pulled towards something that had always been waiting for you. In the distance you saw it. A doorway, a shadowy, ethereal gateway that seemed to open before you. It was an entrance, but it was not to a physical place. It was an entrance to something beyond the realms of your understanding. Something beyond time, beyond death, beyond even the forest itself. It was the doorway to the heart of the forest's true power. The whispers grew louder now. The chorus was no longer a gentle hum. It was a song, a chant. The rhythm of the earth, the pulse of life, the endless, cyclical flow of existence. It was all one, and it was all you. You moved toward the doorway, your feet moving on their own. The roots of the ancient tree continued to wrap around you, pulling you closer, enveloping you in their grasp. The air was thick with the scent of earth, and you felt your body tremble as the forest's energy surged through your veins. The power of it was overwhelming, suffocating, and yet you could not pull away. Do not resist. The voice echoed in your mind, its tone gentle yet unyielding. It was not a command, but a truth as undeniable as the pulse of life itself. And then you crossed the threshold. The world collapsed. Time itself seemed to stretch and bend as you were drawn through the doorway, through the veil that separated the physical from the eternal. You felt your body twist and contort, your senses pulling apart and coming back together in strange, disorienting waves. The world around you was no longer the cavern, no longer the tree. It was nothing, and yet it was everything. You were suspended in a space where the boundaries of time, space, and reality no longer held sway. It was as if you were floating in the very fabric of the universe itself, a consciousness adrift in an endless sea of energy and power. You felt small, and yet you felt infinite. You were a part of something far greater than yourself. You could feel it, the heart of the forest deep within you. It wasn't just around you anymore. It was within you, in every cell of your body, in the very blood that coursed through your veins. The tree, the roots, the earth, they were all a part of you now. You were no longer separate from the forest. You had always been it. You had always been meant to be part of this living, breathing force that pulsed at the heart of the world. You are one with the forest, one with eternity. The words flooded your mind again, this time with a deeper understanding. The forest was not just a place. It was not just a realm. It was a cycle, a life. The forest was the source of everything, the beginning and the end, the life and death of all things. It was a living being, a vast, incomprehensible entity that reached out across the ages, pulling all things into its embrace. And you were now a part of it. You had crossed the threshold and you had become it. The void, the space between existence and non-existence, was both vast and crushing. It pressed in on you from all sides, yet there was no sensation of pressure, not in the way a solid object would feel heavy or restrictive. No, this was a weight that could not be measured by anything physical. It was the weight of everything, the weight of an eternity's worth of stories, memories, and life cycles folded into a single, unbroken thread. In this endless, shifting space, you could feel the forest still pulsing beneath your skin, in the blood that flowed through your veins. His heartbeat, deep, resonant, and infinite, was now your heartbeat. The very air you breathed, or what passed for air in this place, hummed with its presence, a sound both soothing and haunting. You were no longer just a visitor in the forest. You were now an inseparable part of it, woven into the very fabric of its existence, its eternal rhythm. Your vision remained unfocused, yet you could see everything. It was as though the very fabric of the universe had been peeled back and now lay before you, a vast, incomprehensible landscape. You saw the ancient trees stretching across time, their branches reaching out, intertwined with the roots of the earth. You saw the ancient, forgotten spirits of the forest, those long lost to memory, now living in the whispers of the wind, in the movement of the leaves, in the sway of the branches. The wind itself was alive, not in the way the trees were, but with an energy that bent the air, shaping it, molding it with purpose. You are one with it all. The voice that spoke these words was not a single voice, but a chorus, a song sung by the forest itself. It echoed not only in your mind, but in the very marrow of your bones, a sound that resonated deep within you, like the roots of the tree growing deeper into the earth. You felt something shift within you, a change that was both disorienting and liberating. The boundaries of who you were, of who you had been, began to dissolve. You could no longer differentiate between your thoughts and the thoughts of the forest. It was all one now. You had become the forest, and the forest had become you. Your body, your spirit, your essence were bound to it in a way that was both terrifying and comforting. You belong here. You have always belonged. The words seeped into you, dissolving all remnants of doubt. You were no longer a mere traveler. You were the forest's pulse. You were its heartbeat. You were the soil, the roots, the leaves, the fire that burned in the heart of the trees, the water that nourished the roots. You had been woven into the fabric of its being, a part of something far older, far deeper than any single soul could ever comprehend. Yet, in that same instant, you understood. You understood the purpose of this place. The forest was not merely alive. It was endless, a never-ending cycle of life and death, growth and decay, creation and destruction. Every leaf that fell from the trees was reborn in the soil, feeding the roots, feeding the next generation. Every tree that died in the forest was the beginning of something new. The forest existed beyond the limits of time. It was timeless, ageless, its existence both fleeting and eternal. You were not alone in this place. The whispers swirled around you, but now they were no longer just the voices of the forest. No, the whispers were the voices of everything. You could hear the lost souls of the forest, the spirits of those who had lived and died long before you arrived. You could feel the presence of countless beings, of animals, of trees, of insects, who had been a part of the forest for millennia. Their memories, their lives, their essence flowed through the very ground you stood on, through the roots that connected every living thing to each other. You are the keeper of their stories. The realization struck you like a thunderclap. The forest had not just claimed you, it had chosen you. Chosen you to be its guardian, its vessel, its storyteller. The whispers were the voices of the forest, yes, but they were also the voices of every being that had ever lived and died here. The trees, the creatures, the spirits, all of them had left behind their stories, their experiences, their knowledge. And now, you were the one to carry those stories forward, to protect them, to honor them. You could feel it now, an overwhelming weight but not a burden. No, this weight was one of purpose. A purpose that had always been a part of you, even before you had arrived in the forest. You had always been meant for this. To be a part of the forest's eternal cycle, to carry its memories and its life force through the ages. The forest has given you its gift, its knowledge, its power. The words were not a command. They were an offering, a promise. And as the forest's power flowed through you, you felt something else shift within you. It was a quiet, subtle change, but it was profound. The space around you, the void, the endless expanse, began to take form. The shapes of trees emerged from the darkness, their forms shifting and blending with the shifting shadows. The roots of the ancient tree spread out before you, vast and sprawling, like the fingers of the earth reaching out to touch the stars. It was no longer a place of emptiness. It was no longer a space between worlds. It was the forest. It was the forest and beyond. The energy of the forest, the life that pulsed through it, was now spread before you like an endless ocean, stretching out across the horizon. The line between the physical and the spiritual, between the living and the dead, had blurred. Here, in this space, the forest was alive, but so were the memories of those who had come before. And you, as its keeper, its storyteller, were part of that eternal cycle. But even as the weight of this knowledge settled into your being, you could feel the forest pulling at you again, urging you to move, to continue, to explore what had been revealed to you. The journey is not over. The words echoed in your mind, not as a command, but as a gentle invitation. There was more to discover, more to understand, more to become. You stepped forward, but as you did, the landscape around you began to change. The shadows that had once surrounded you melted away, replaced by the flickering light of a fire. You were no longer in the cavern, no longer in the void. You were standing beneath the canopy of trees again, surrounded by the familiar warmth of the fire's glow. And yet, something was different. The air was thick with the scent of damp leaves and moss, but it was the scent of memory. The flames crackled softly, but there was something ancient about their dance. The forest had shifted, had changed again. You could hear the familiar sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the call of distant creatures. But it felt distant, as though you were seeing them through the lens of a memory, a dream. The firelight flickered again, casting long, moving shadows across the trees. And there, standing just beyond the reach of the firelight, was the figure. The one who had first led you into the forest. The one who had spoken to you in the dark. Its glowing eyes burned brighter now, and its form was clearer, more defined. No longer just a shadow, it was a figure, tall and imposing, its face hidden beneath the cloak of darkness. It stood silently watching you. "You are ready?" The voice of the forest echoed once more, deeper this time, resonating through the very air itself. It was time to move forward. Time to step into the next chapter of your existence. The fire flickered once more, casting a warm, dancing light that made the shadows around you stretch and writhe like living things. The sound of the flames crackling was a rhythmic beat, a steady pulse, as if the very fire had been born from the heartbeat of the forest itself. It was both familiar and unsettling, like hearing an ancient lullaby whispered by the earth, sung by the trees. The figure in the distance, its eyes burning with that same intense, unyielding light, remained motionless, a sentinel of the forest's will. The air around you seemed thick with the weight of something, a presence, a decision that lingered, unseen, waiting to settle. Every breath you took felt as though you were drawing in not just air, but the very essence of the forest itself, its power, its memory. The weight of it pressed against your chest, but this time there was no fear. Only a deep, visceral understanding that you had crossed into something new, something vast. You have walked the path of the living, the voice rumbled deep inside you, its tone both welcoming and somber. Now you must walk the path of the echoes. The words were not just heard, but felt as though they were imprinted upon your very soul. The echoes? You understood immediately. The forest wasn't just alive. Remembered. Every step, every life that had ever passed through its trees, every soul that had come before you, was now an echo in the forest's memory. They lived in the whispers of the leaves, in the rhythm of the wind, in the pull of the roots. The forest itself was a living repository, an eternal keeper of all things that had come before. The figure's burning eyes shifted, and you felt its gaze turn upon you, intense and unblinking, as though it were seeing straight through your very being, beyond the layers of flesh and bone, to the very core of your existence. There was no escape from its gaze. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even judgment. It was simply the truth, unadorned and unrelenting. It was the forest truth. The echoes called to you, the figure's voice echoed as though it were now a chorus, coming not from one source but from everywhere. The trees, the stones, the wind, all of it spoke with a single unified voice. And you knew that your journey, your real journey, had just begun. The ground beneath your feet shifted again, subtle but undeniable. The very earth seemed to ripple, as though the landscape itself was folding, rearranging, becoming something else. The firelight around you flickered more violently now, casting long, twisted shadows that twisted around the trees like serpents. You could feel it, movement, but not physical movement. It was as if the forest itself was shifting, changing. The air became heavier, laden with the scent of something ancient, something old. The whispering became clearer, more distinct. Follow the path of the echoes. You took a step forward, your body moving almost of its own accord. The figure remained still, but it wasn't just standing anymore. It had become a part of the landscape. Its presence was in the trees, in the fire, in the very air you breathed. It was no longer an outsider to the forest. It was the forest, and now it was you, a part of the eternal cycle. A keeper of all the stories, all the echoes, all the memories that the forest cradled within its roots. The shadows ahead of you began to form shapes, figures, silent, shifting forms that appeared and disappeared like fleeting memories. You couldn't make them out clearly, just outlines, fleeting glimpses, faces half-formed in the dim light. They moved in and out of the firelight, their movements erratic, as though they were not entirely bound by the laws of reality. They were echoes, their forms shifting, blending into the shadows of the forest. You could hear their voices, but they were muffled, distorted, like the sound of distant whispers carried on the wind. Words you couldn't quite catch. Familiar yet foreign. Their stories were incomplete, fragments, like pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together. These were the lost souls, the spirits of the forest's past, living in the echoes of the wind, in the rustling of the leaves. And they were calling to you. Listen to them. The voice was inside your mind, but it was no longer just one voice. It was the collective voice of the forest, the chorus of forgotten souls. The spirits of those who had once walked these woods, lived among the trees, and now lingered in the forest's memory. They were calling to you, urging you to listen to their tales, their fragments of lives. They want to be heard. You took another step forward, drawn deeper into the clearing. The figures ahead of you were more distinct now, their outlines sharper, their faces clearer. They were no longer mere shadows. They were spirits, their forms translucent, barely holding their shape, their eyes filled with a mix of longing and sorrow. The firelight flickered once again, casting a deep, crimson glow over their faces. You could see their eyes now, empty, hollow eyes that seemed to stare straight through you. They were not looking at you in the way living creatures looked. They were looking through you as though they were searching for something that they had long since lost. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping rapidly, but it was not a chill that made you shiver. No, this cold was ancient. It was the cold of the earth's forgotten memories, of the past that could never be truly laid to rest. You could feel it in your bones, a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to seep into your very soul. It was the weight of the lost, the weight of those who had wandered the forest before you, never truly leaving. Do you hear them? The voice was soft, almost a whisper now, but it was louder than any of the sounds around you. It was like the rustling of leaves, like the creaking of ancient branches, like the wind howling through the trees. You nodded. Yes, you heard them. They have no voice, no form, no future. They live in the echoes. You stepped closer to them. The figures did not move. They stood, still as the trees, their bodies swaying gently as though moved by an invisible wind. Their faces were etched with a quiet desperation, but also a profound sense of acceptance. These spirits were not lost anymore. They had come to terms with their place in the forest, with the fact that their lives were now only whispers, only fragments in the endless cycle. And as you approached, the ground beneath you shifted again, the firelight dimming for just a moment before flaring back to life. The spirits turned their eyes toward you, and you felt a strange sensation stir within you, a sensation you could not name. It was as if they were waiting for you to do something, waiting for you to hear their stories. Listen, remember, share. The voice was clearer now. It was not the voice of the forest, not the voice of the figure, but the voice of the spirits themselves. You were standing at the edge of a precipice, at the boundary between the living and the dead. The forest, in all its vastness and eternity, had woven their stories into its very fabric, and now it was asking you, no, imploring you, to hear them, to carry their tales forward. You closed your eyes, feeling the weight of the forest's stories pressing in on you, enveloping you. The whispers of those who had come before you grew louder, but they were no longer whispers. They were voices. Real, tangible voices, speaking to you from the depths of the earth, from the spaces between the trees. You could hear them now. You could feel their stories, their pain, their joys, their fears, their triumphs, all woven into the pulse of the forest. And now you understood. You were not just a traveler anymore. You were the forest's keeper. You were its storyteller. The echoes of the past had called to you, and you had answered. Now it was time to carry their stories forward. The whispers grew louder, not in volume, but in presence. They were not chaotic voices anymore, fragmented by time and space, but a unified presence. The forest had become a single entity, alive in a way that transcended anything you had known. The spirits, the echoes of the past, were no longer just passing shadows. They had form, they had substance. And you were the bridge between them and the world of the living. You stood at the threshold of something vast, something ancient, something far beyond the understanding of any mortal mind. The figures that hovered in the firelight, their translucent bodies flickering like the dying embers, gazed at you with eyes filled with longing, with quiet hope. Their faces were no longer veiled in shadow. You could see them clearly now, human and beast, man and woman, young and old, each with their own story, their own history carved into their expressions. Each one had been a part of the forest once, and now their voices had become one with the wind, with the rustling leaves, with the very pulse of the earth. Their stories, once forgotten, were now waiting for someone to listen, someone to carry them forward, someone to remember them. And that someone you had arrived. A deep, resonant hum echoed in the air, vibrating through the ground beneath your feet. The forest itself seemed to be breathing, as though it were alive with anticipation. The firelight flickered, casting strange shadows that stretched and warped, as though they too were reaching out to you, beckoning you into the fold of the ancient cycle. You could feel it now, the weight of the forest's memory pressing against you. The voices, the spirits, they had become your responsibility. No longer just guardians of the forest's past, they had become the very lifeblood of the forest's future. And it was up to you to carry them, to protect them, to weave their stories into the tapestry of the living world. The figure, dark, towering, and ever-present, shifted in the periphery of your vision, its glowing eyes following your every move. You could feel its gaze, but it was not one of judgment. It was a gaze that recognized your role in the forest's eternal cycle. It was the gaze of a mentor, a guide, a force of nature itself that had seen countless souls come and go. And now, it saw you as the one who would carry the forest's legacy forward. Do you understand what this means? The voice was not a question, but a statement. You knew what it meant. The weight of your responsibility was immense, but it was not a burden. It was a gift. The forest had chosen you, had brought you here, not by chance, but by design. You were the one who would keep its stories alive. You were the one who would tell them. The forest will always change, the voice continued, softer now, a quiet whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. But its stories, its memories, its soul, they will live on in you. You are its keeper now. The air seemed to shimmer with the power of these words, vibrating with a subtle energy that made your skin tingle. The fire around you crackled and popped, sending sparks flying into the night, and the shadows of the forest seemed to grow darker, deeper. It was as though the very land itself had come alive with the promise of what was to come. The spirits, the echoes, moved closer to you now. They did not speak, but their presence was overwhelming. Each one seemed to carry its own story, its own truth, its own piece of the puzzle that made up the history of this sacred place. They gathered around you like a crowd of long-lost souls, each one reaching out with its eyes, with its presence, begging you to remember, begging you to tell their stories. You felt their pain, their joy, their grief. You felt their lives, their deaths, their struggles. The spirits of the forest had lived here long before you arrived, and now they would live on through you. The weight of their collective memory pressed against your chest, filling you with a strange sense of both empowerment and sorrow. Do you accept this responsibility? The voice, though still an echo, rang through you like a bell, its reverberations shaking the very core of your being. You had no choice but to accept it. The forest had already chosen you. You were its vessel now, its storyteller, the keeper of its memories. You could feel the weight of it, not just as a duty, but as a sacred honor. To be chosen by the forest, to be entrusted with its stories, its soul, it was the most profound gift you could ever receive. You nodded, though no one was there to see it. It was not a choice, not a question to be answered with words. It was an understanding, a bond forged between you and the forest, sealed in the deepest recesses of your soul. The spirits around you seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. and the air grew lighter, though still thick with the power of the forest's ancient will. Then you shall be the voice of the forest. The moment the words left the voice, the world around you shifted once again. The firelight seemed to burn brighter, the shadows in the trees growing longer and more intense, as though they were drawn to you, pulled by some unseen force. The air became heavier with the weight of memory, and you felt a surge of energy course through your body like lightning racing through your veins. You were no longer just standing in the forest. You had become one with it. The spirits were no longer distant echoes, they were inside you, living within you, their memories etched into your very being. You could feel their lives, their deaths, their joys and sorrows as if they were your own. They were no longer just voices in the wind, they were you. A distant sound, like the call of an animal, echoed through the trees. It was a sound both mournful and beautiful, a sound that seemed to resonate with the very fabric of the earth itself. It was the forest's heartbeat, the pulse of the ancient land that stretched far beyond the boundaries of your understanding. You felt the pull of it, drawing you forward, pulling you deeper into its depths. You felt it in your bones, in your very soul. The spirits, the echoes, began to fade into the shadows, blending back into the very fabric of the forest. But their voices remained, echoing inside your mind, whispering their stories into your thoughts. You were their keeper now, their voice, the one who would carry their legacy forward into the living world and beyond. Tell their stories. Remember them. Keep the cycle alive. And so you did. You stepped forward, deeper into the forest, guided by the pull of the earth beneath your feet, by the whispers of the past, by the weight of the forest's legacy. The night around you deepened, the firelight flickering in your wake, as the shadows of the trees stretched long and dark across the forest floor. The spirits, the echoes, would always be with you. They would live on in the stories you would tell, in the way you would share their lives with the world. You were their voice now. You were the keeper of the forest's soul. The journey was far from over. The forest was silent, yet it thrummed with life. Each step you took, the ground seemed to shift beneath you, as if the very earth was aware of your presence. The path, though invisible to the eye, was clear in your heart. The shadows around you no longer felt like they were mere absence of light. They were something more. They were alive. They moved with purpose, like the gentle, unseen hand of the forest guiding you onward. As you walked deeper into the trees, the firelight behind you faded, swallowed by the thick underbrush and the overhanging branches. It felt as though the forest had sealed you in, as though you were now in the heart of something older than time itself. The air grew cooler, the scent of damp earth stronger, mixing with the faintest trace of something sweet, a memory of flowers that had long since withered. The spirits that had once hovered near you had faded into the ether, becoming a part of the forest's pulse, and yet they were not gone. Their presence lingered, not as ghosts, but as a part of the very fabric of the woods. Every rustle of leaves, every sigh of the wind, every crack of a twig underfoot carried their voices with it, a soft, melodic echo of their lives. You are the bridge now. The voice of the forest resonated deeply within your mind, like a low hum vibrating through your very being. It was not a command. It was a truth, spoken with quiet authority, as if the forest had always known you would come to understand it in this way. You were no longer just a traveler. You were a part of the forest's eternal cycle. You were its voice, its memory, its heartbeat. The time has come to witness the memories, to see the truth of this land. You didn't need to ask what it meant. The forest had always been this way, unspoken, unhurried, revealing only what you were ready to know. And now you were ready. The trees around you seemed to lean in closer, their branches forming a canopy above that filtered the faint moonlight into ethereal, silver beams. The air felt thick with something ancient and profound, and it drew you deeper still into the heart of the forest. And then you saw it. Through the dense brush, the flickering glow of light began to take shape. It was a fire, but not like the one you had left behind. This fire was soft and flickering, a low, steady flame that seemed to burn with an eternal, unquenchable hunger. But it was not a fire of destruction. No, this fire was the light of the forest itself, an eternal flame that had burned since the first seed had sprouted from the soil. The flames danced and shimmered as if they were alive, twisting and turning like wisps of smoke, not bound to the laws of physics but to the rhythm of the earth, to the heartbeat of the forest. You could feel the pull of it, the call that had brought you here. This was the forest's heart. This was where its power lay. The flame that burns here is the flame of memories, the flame of truth. You stepped forward, drawn toward the fire, your feet moving with a purpose that had long since transcended the need for thought. As you neared the fire, the world around you seemed to dissolve, the trees, the shadows, the very earth beneath you fading into nothingness. There was only the flame, only the heartbeat of the forest. The moment you stepped into the circle of light, the air around you seemed to breathe, deep, slow, like the forest itself had exhaled after holding its breath for eons. And then it began. The fire flickered brighter, and within its light, images began to form. Not just fleeting images, but vivid, solid memories. You could see them as clearly as you saw the trees around you. The figures, long since passed, stood within the firelight, their faces clear, their eyes filled with purpose. They were the spirits of the forest, but they were not just specters. They were alive in a way that transcended physical form. Each figure, each spirit held a story within it, and you could hear those stories. You could feel them. Each memory was a thread, and together they wove the tapestry of the forest's past. The first figure stepped forward, a man tall and strong with the unmistakable markings of someone who had lived in the forest for most of his life. His face was weathered, his eyes deep with wisdom. He spoke, though his words did not pass through his lips. You heard them in your mind. I was once the keeper of the flame. I watched over the forest's memory, its stories, its truths. I protected what was lost, what was forgotten. It was my duty and my honor. The figure stepped back, fading into the flame as another stepped forward. A woman, her eyes filled with sorrow, but also with a deep, unshakable resolve. I was the one who kept the balance. The forest cannot live without death, just as the earth cannot grow without decay. I tended to the hearts of the fallen, to those who were lost, those who wandered and never returned. I guided them into the next world. The fire flickered again, and another figure appeared, this time a child. Barely more than a silhouette, its features barely discernible, but there was something timeless in its eyes. It spoke without words, its voice resonating deep in your chest, echoing with a sadness that transcended age. I was the last to remember, the last to carry the stories, the last to walk the earth before it fell silent. But I never forgot. I never let the flame go out. It still burns. It will always burn. The images in the fire grew more intense, the flames twisting and crackling with the force of ancient memories. The forest stories, its deepest secrets, were unfolding before you. You could see them all, the warriors, the healers, the wanderers, the lost souls who had passed through the forest and left their mark on the land. Each one had a story. Each one had a life. And each one had left a part of themselves behind. These stories are the foundation of the forest. They are the pulse of the land. And now they are yours to carry. The flame flickered once more, and the images faded into the ether, leaving behind a faint, lingering warmth. The fire burned steadily, its glow soft but unyielding, a beacon in the heart of the forest. You were no longer just standing in the firelight. You had become part of it. The stories, the memories, the truths of the forest had passed into you. You felt them within you, coursing through your veins like a fire that could not be quenched. You are the keeper now. The voice was not just a whisper anymore. It was the voice of the forest, of every tree, every spirit, every soul that had ever lived within its embrace. You were the one who would carry the flame forward. You were the one who would remember. You stepped back from the fire, the weight of the forest's truth heavy upon your shoulders. But it was not a burden. It was a gift. The forest had chosen you to carry its stories, its memories, its power. You were the keeper of the flame. And now you would carry it into the future, into the world beyond the trees. You would protect the forest's legacy, and in doing so, you would protect the heart of the world itself. The forest had given you its truth. Now it was your turn to share it. You stepped back from the fire, feeling its warmth seep into your bones, its light burnishing your spirit. But the fire's light, while comforting, was not what drew you forward. The forest, alive with its stories, now pulsed with a new rhythm, a rhythm that was yours to follow. It was as though the pulse of the earth itself had synchronized with your own heartbeat, and you were no longer just a traveler passing through its vastness. You were a part of it. The forest had woven you into its tapestry, and you could feel its pulse in every fiber of your being. The path before you was no longer just a winding trail through trees and shadows. It was a journey into the heart of the forest's memory, into the soul of everything that had ever walked beneath its boughs. The weight of this new purpose sat upon you like the heaviest of cloaks, yet there was no burden, only a sense of deep, overwhelming responsibility. The echoes of the past, the whispers of the forest's long-dead guardians, had become your own voice, your own truth. You are the bridge between worlds now, the voice of the forest whispered, soft but unyielding, like the wind stirring the leaves. You carry both the past and the future within you. The flame that you protect is the flame of life itself. You took a step forward, your eyes drawn toward the deeper, darker reaches of the forest. The trees here were older, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their bark thick with the weight of centuries. The shadows between the trees were deeper, more impenetrable, but they did not frighten you. They called to you, beckoned you onward, as though they held the answers to questions you hadn't yet asked. The moon above was a thin sliver, its pale light barely breaking through the thick canopy above. But it didn't matter. The forest itself was alive with its own illumination. The air felt charged with ancient power, as though the trees themselves were watching you, waiting for you to make the next move. The fire within you, within your very soul, seemed to rise in response like a living thing that pulsed in time with the very earth beneath your feet. And yet, as you ventured deeper, something shifted. It was subtle at first, the change in the air. The soft, rhythmic hum of the forest's energy began to slow. The whispers of the trees became quieter, less distinct, as though they were being drowned out by a heavy silence. The birds that had once chirped above fell silent, as if the forest itself had held its breath. It felt like you were walking into the eye of a storm. The stillness around you was unnerving, thick like the weight of forgotten memories. The forest was no longer pulsing with the living energy of its heartbeat. It was waiting for something, but you couldn't tell what. You could feel it deep in the marrow of your bones, like a pressure building in the atmosphere. There is a place beyond this, a place where the echoes of the past grow faint. The forest holds no more stories there, only silence. The voice was softer now, distant, as if the forest were speaking from a great distance, its words falling like raindrops in an empty cavern. And in that silence you felt a strange pull, a pull deeper than anything before. Something was calling you, beckoning you toward the quiet. But what? The path before you twisted and turned, the trees growing denser, their trunks thicker, their boughs reaching upward like clawed hands. The air had grown heavier still, the scent of wet earth and moss thick in your nostrils. There was a coldness to the air now, though not the biting chill of winter. This was a coldness that sank deeper, a chill that went beyond the physical into something far more ancient. It was as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for you to move. And then you saw it. A clearing. But not just any clearing. This one was vast, its edges framed by twisted trees whose gnarled roots seemed to claw their way into the earth as though desperately trying to keep something contained. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone altar, weathered and covered with moss, its surface cracked and scarred with the passage of time. The stone was cold, ancient, and alive with an energy that hummed faintly in the air. There was something here, something waiting for you. You felt it in the air, the silence pressing down around you like a heavy blanket. The forest had gone quiet, its whispers now mere echoes of the past. Even the birds had ceased their calls. The world seemed suspended in this place as though time itself had stopped. This is the place where the echoes fade, the voice murmured, the words wrapping around you like a forgotten memory. Here the past ceases to speak. Here the stories of the forest are lost to the winds, buried beneath layers of dust and shadow. But it is not the end. It is merely a pause, a breath between moments. And you, keeper, must choose whether to let it fade, or to return it to the flame. You stepped forward, your feet crunching softly on the damp earth as you made your way to the altar. It seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, the stone glimmering faintly in the moonlight. The closer you drew to it, the heavier the air became, thick with a sense of finality. The altar was not just a marker. It was a place of transformation, of change. It was where the forest's deepest secrets, its oldest memories, had been sealed away, forgotten, or perhaps deliberately concealed. You placed your hand on the stone, and immediately, a wave of cold washed over you. The ground beneath your feet seemed to tremble, and for a brief moment, you felt as though the earth itself had shifted beneath you. The air grew thick, suffocating, pressing in on you from all sides. And then the silence broke. A voice, deep, old, and hollow, rippled through the air, not in your mind, but in the very space around you, as though it were coming from the earth itself. You have come to awaken the lost. The words were not a question. They were a declaration, a prophecy. You could feel them resonating through you, vibrating in your chest, echoing through your bones. The forest is not just life. It is death. It is creation and destruction. It is the keeper of the past, but it is also the harbinger of the future. And the future, keeper, will be shaped by your choice. Your fingers tightened on the stone, your pulse quickening. What choice? What future? The forest has remembered you, the voice continued. It has remembered your name, your soul, your purpose. But there is a part of it, the deepest part, that has been buried. The stories that are lost, the memories that have faded into the darkness. You are the keeper now. You hold the flame. And in your hands, you hold the power to bring those memories back to life. The stone beneath your hand began to glow, faintly at first, then with increasing intensity. The glow spread outward, swirling into the air like smoke coiling around you. The forest trembled. The altar shuddered. And suddenly, images began to form before you, visions of long-forgotten faces, of moments lost in time, of figures standing in the shadows of the trees. They were the spirits, the forgotten ones, the ones who had lived in the forest before you. Their voices rose, mingling with the hum of the forest, filling the air with their stories, stories of loss, of triumph, of hope, and of despair. But they were not silent anymore. They were speaking through you. They were waiting for you to hear them, to bring their stories into the light. The lost must be remembered, the voice echoed. The keeper must choose. Will you let the stories fade into the silence? Or will you awaken them? The choice was yours. The weight of the choice pressed against you like a storm cloud heavy with rain ready to break. The air around you had thickened, swirling with the energy of the forest's ancient past. The stone altar pulsed beneath your hand, its glow brightening and dimming in a rhythm that seemed to follow the beat of your heart. You could feel the presence of the spirits around you, their eyes upon you, waiting. The silence of the forest had become so thick you could almost taste it, the tension in the air growing unbearable. The voices of the forest, the memories of those long forgotten, whispered at the edges of your consciousness, but they were not clear. They were not distinct. They were like 1,000 faint echoes, carried by the wind, each one calling to you in its own way. They begged to be heard. They begged to be remembered. The choice is yours, the voice of the forest said again, but this time it was not a declaration. It was a plea. The words seemed to tremble in the air as though they too were waiting for an answer. Will you awaken the lost? The spirits around you faded in and out of the edges of your vision, their forms shimmering like shadows cast by flickering flames. Each spirit, each forgotten face, carried with it a story, stories of lives that had once been lived in this very forest. And those stories were fading. Slowly, imperceptibly, they were slipping away like sand through the cracks of time. The forest had grown quiet, and in its silence, the echoes had become harder to hear. You stepped back from the altar, your hand falling away from the stone. The light from the altar seemed to dim, as if it were retreating, like a fading memory. And in that moment, you realized what the forest was asking of you. It was not just a choice between remembering or forgetting. It was a choice between life and death, between bringing the forest's history back to the light or letting it slip back into the shadow of the past, where it might never be known again. The flame of memory has flickered long enough. You are its keeper now, and what you do with it will shape the future. You closed your eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the spirit's gaze upon you. They weren't just watching you, they were part of you now. Their voices had become your voice. Their memories were woven into your soul, tangled with your own. The forest had given you its power, its truth, and with it, the responsibility to carry its legacy forward. The question still hung in the air, echoing within your mind. Will you awaken the lost? Remember the past, the forest's voice whispered, quieter now, as though it were speaking from the depths of a well. Awaken the memories. Let the stories live again. You nodded, though the motion felt almost automatic, as though your body had already made the decision for you. The weight of the forest's history pressed down on you, and you knew that this was the only path forward. The past could not stay silent. The stories could not remain forgotten. To let them fade would be to erase a part of the forest, a part of its soul. It was a choice you couldn't ignore. The flame will not burn forever, the voice murmured, and you must carry it before it fades entirely. You stepped back toward the altar, your feet moving without hesitation. The stone beneath your feet seemed to shift and quake as you moved closer, as though the earth itself were waking from a long slumber. The glow of the altar brightened again, and this time, the air around you hummed with a powerful, palpable energy. The spirits' voices began to swell, rising from the depths of the earth like a chorus of ancient souls. They were no longer faint whispers. They were becoming real, becoming whole. You placed your hands on the stone altar once more. This time the contact was different. The moment your fingers touched the cold surface, a flood of images burst into your mind. They were not memories of your own, but of those who had come before you. Faces, lives, stories of joy, sorrow, triumph, and defeat. Faces you recognized though you had never seen them before. The first memory came with a rush. A young man standing at the edge of the forest, staring out at the horizon as the sun set behind the mountains. His eyes were filled with hope, with dreams of a life he had yet to live. He had been a traveler once like you. But unlike you, he had not known the forest's secrets. He had not known the weight of the stories buried beneath the trees. He had come to the forest, seeking solace, seeking something he could never name. And he had found it. Or perhaps it had found him. The forest had whispered its secrets into his heart, and in return he had become a part of its history. But he had not been the first, and he had not been the last. Another memory came, this time of a woman, her face worn with age but her eyes bright with wisdom. She stood beneath the great oak, her hands pressed against its bark as if she were listening to the very heartbeat of the tree. Her name had been Elara, and she had been the guardian of the forest for many years. She had been the one who kept the flame burning when others had faltered. She had passed on the stories, the memories, the truths of the forest so that they would never be forgotten. But her time had passed, and now it was your turn. The memories continued to flood your mind. Memories of the lost, memories of those who had wandered these woods long before you had ever stepped foot in them. You could feel them all, their lives intertwined with yours, their stories becoming part of your own. The past was no longer distant. It was alive, burning bright within you. You could hear their voices clearly now, no longer muffled by time, no longer faint echoes, but real, tangible voices. They spoke through you, filling the silence that had once threatened to consume the forest. The flame was rekindled. You took a deep breath, and as you did, the entire forest seemed to breathe with you. The trees groaned softly, their leaves rustling as if they were waking from a long, dreamless sleep. The air was filled with the scent of pine and earth, of rain and moss, of memories long buried and now awakened. You could feel the forest pulse beneath your feet, stronger now, more vibrant. The fire had been lit again. The flame of the past, the flame of memory, was burning brightly. And in that light, the shadows retreated. The spirits gathered around you once more, their forms clearer than ever before. They were not just figments of the past anymore. They were here, in the present, living once again in the stories you had awakened. Their eyes glowed with a quiet joy, a peace that came from knowing they had not been forgotten, knowing their voices would live on. "You have done it, Keeper," the voice of the forest said, its tone softer now, filled with gratitude. "The lost have been remembered. The stories are alive again. And the forest shall continue, its pulse stronger than ever." You stood in the center of the clearing, surrounded by the spirits of the past, the flame of memory burning brightly before you. The weight of your responsibility had not lessened, but it no longer felt like a burden. It was a gift, a sacred trust. The forest had shared its history with you, and now it was your turn to share it with the world. You were no longer just a traveler, no longer just a keeper. You were a storyteller, a bridge between the past and the future, between the living and the dead. And you would carry those stories forward for as long as the flame burned. The flame in your soul was no longer just a flickering spark. It had become a roaring fire, alive with the voices of the forest's past, its present, and all that would come after. The ancient stories of those who had walked the earth before you no longer existed only in whispered memories. They were woven into the very fabric of the world around you. Every leaf that rustled in the wind, every branch that swayed in the distance, seemed to hum with the energy of those stories. It was as though the forest itself was alive with the heartbeat of 1,000 souls, their voices singing in the wind. You stood at the center of the clearing, the flame of the past burning brightly in your chest. The spirits, those who had once been lost, forgotten, had gathered around you, their forms flickering in and out like the shadows of the trees. They were no longer just figures from the past. They were here with you, alive in the memories that you now carried. Their faces were clear, their eyes filled with gratitude and longing, and in them, you could see the reflection of your own purpose. The flame is lit, the voice of the forest whispered. The stories have been remembered. Now it is time for you to carry them. The words resonated deep within you, settling like the weight of the earth itself in your chest. The task was not done. The forest had given you its power, its history, but it had not asked for silence. It had asked for life. It had asked for its stories to be told, its memories to be shared, its truth to be known. And it was up to you to carry that flame forward, to be the bearer of the forest's legacy. The wind began to stir, picking up speed as if answering the call. The leaves above rustled in the trees, their soft whispers now more distinct than ever. The spirits moved with the wind, flowing through the air like smoke, and the light of the altar flickered with a steady rhythm, as though it too had taken on a life of its own. It was as though the world itself was waiting for you to make the next move. Do you understand now? The voice came not from any one spirit, but from the collective presence of the forest itself, its vast, unyielding soul pressing against you. You felt the weight of the question, and yet it was not one you needed to answer with words. You had already accepted the truth. You are the keeper. The flame is yours to carry. The stories are yours to tell. And you will spread them, wherever you go. You nodded again, the fire in your chest burning brighter, spreading through your veins, warming every inch of your body. The energy that surged through you felt like it came from the core of the earth itself, powerful, ancient, and vast. But there was something more, something that you hadn't fully understood until now. The flame was not just a light to guide you. It was a connection. A link between you and the forest, between you and the world. It was the thread that wove your story with all the others that had come before you. But there is more you must know, Keeper. The wind shifted, bringing with it a sense of urgency, a sense of direction. You could feel the pull of something in the distance, something waiting for you beyond the clearing. The flame you carry is not just for memory. It is for the future. The voice of the forest grew clearer, its message more urgent. You could sense a change in the air. The world around you was not just a snapshot of the past. It was alive, shifting, moving, growing, dying just as it always had. The flame you carried was not just to preserve the past. It was to protect the future. The spirits around you moved closer now, their forms solidifying as they gathered at the edges of the clearing. They were not just ghosts. They were guardians, beings of the forest who had protected it, who had carried its memories when it had needed them. They were asking you to be their voice, their hands, their eyes. The night air was thick with expectation, but there was also something else, a sense of hope, of promise. It was as if the forest had been waiting for this moment for centuries, waiting for you to take your place in its endless cycle. The world around you seemed to shift, the trees growing taller, their trunks thickening, their roots digging deeper into the earth. The light from the altar spread like a flood of gold, casting long shadows that danced like spirits at the edge of the forest. The moon above was no longer a sliver. It had grown full, casting its pale light over everything in a serene, silvery glow. But there was no time for rest. No time to linger in the comfort of the stories you had awakened. The forest had called you to this place, and now it was asking you to move. It was asking you to take its legacy, its memories, and to spread them, to carry them out into the world beyond. The spirits began to fade slowly, their forms dissolving back into the ether of the forest. They were not gone. They were part of the land, part of its heartbeat, part of its pulse. Their stories, their voices would live on through you, through the flame you carried. And then, as the last of them faded from view, you felt the pull to leave. The forest had given you its stories, its memories. But now it was your turn to spread them, to bring the forest's truth into the world beyond, to let others hear the stories of those who had walked before, and to show them the flame that burned at the heart of the world. The flame of life, the flame of memory, the flame of the future. You turned, your steps sure and steady, and as you walked away from the clearing, you knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, forces that would try to smother the flame, to extinguish the stories that had been passed to you. But you were ready. The forest had taught you its truth. It had entrusted you with its flame. And now it was your turn to share it, to let others see the world through its eyes, to show them the power of memory, of connection, of life. And so, with the flame burning brightly in your heart, you set your sights on the world beyond the forest. The stories must be told. The forest had grown silent behind you, but its weight, its pulse, stayed within your chest. The flame you carried had become a part of you, intertwined with your very soul. It warmed your heart, and yet, in the same breath, made you keenly aware of the vastness of the world outside, of the journey that lay before you. The quiet of the forest, its deep, endless secrets, had given way to a new kind of silence, one that echoed with the questions and mysteries of the unknown. You stood at the edge of the forest, staring out into the land that stretched beyond, an unfamiliar terrain, vast and open, with rolling hills and wide, endless skies. The trees behind you were ancient, thick, and dense, but the world before you was open, free, and full of possibilities. Yet, despite the beauty of the land, a sense of unease crept into your heart. You were no longer just a traveler in a world of unknowns. You were the keeper of the forest stories now. And the weight of that responsibility pressed on you, like the gravity of 1,000 lives, all waiting to be remembered. The wind stirred around you, whispering through the leaves, urging you to take the next step. The flame is yours to protect, Keeper. The world outside does not understand, but it will. The voice of the forest echoed in your mind, its words clear and persistent. The stories must be shared, and they will lead you to those who are ready to hear them. The forest had not just given you a gift, it had given you a purpose. And now you were to carry it out into the world beyond. But what would you find? What would the world offer you as you walked its roads? The first step was easy. You turned your back on the forest, letting its shadows fade into the distance, their form growing dimmer and dimmer as you walked further away. The clearing you had left behind seemed to grow smaller, as though it had been part of a dream, an illusion that would dissipate in the morning light. But you knew deep within you that it was not a dream. The forest would always be with you, in the memories you carried and the stories you would tell. You could feel it pulsing within you, stronger than the beating of your own heart. It was a fire that could never be extinguished. As you walked farther, the terrain changed. The thick woods gave way to open fields, tall grass swaying gently in the breeze. The path before you grew clearer, a well-worn track that twisted and turned with the land's natural flow. You could see distant hills, their shapes softened by the distance. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of wildflowers and earth, but there was a crispness to it that hinted at something colder, something that would come in time. Autumn was coming. But even the beauty of the open land, the promise of a world full of new stories, did little to calm the unease in your heart. You were carrying something with you, a legacy, a responsibility, that would change the course of everything it touched. The world outside the forest was vast, filled with cities, villages, and people who lived without knowledge of the ancient woods you had just left behind. Would they welcome the stories? Or would they turn away, unwilling to listen to the past that you now carried? The stories must be shared. They will be heard when the time is right. You didn't know what that time would be. You didn't know who would listen, who would understand. But the flame you carried had not just been passed to you. It had become your own. And that flame would light the path ahead, guiding you toward those who needed to hear it. The first village you came across was small, no more than a collection of cottages nestled against a river that wound its way through the valley. The air here felt different, less alive, as though it was held captive by the river's flow. The people were simple, their lives focused on survival, their days spent tending to their fields or mending what was broken. They lived in quiet harmony with the land, but there was a distance between them and the world beyond. As you walked through the village, you noticed the curious glances cast your way. The flame within you flickered, a silent warning. These were not the people you were looking for. These were not the ones who would hear the stories of the forest. But the moment was fleeting. You continued on, walking with purpose, letting the village fade behind you as the path stretched onward, deeper into the unknown. It wasn't long before you encountered a caravan. Travelers, merchants, wanderers who crossed the land with goods and stories of their own. They were a varied group, all with their own reasons for roaming, each carrying their own flame, whether it be the hunger for wealth, the thirst for adventure, or the desire to forget something that had been lost. You approached them with hesitation, unsure of what kind of reception you would receive. A tall man with a thick, graying beard approached you first. His eyes were sharp, assessing, but there was a curiosity there too. He studied you for a moment before speaking, his voice deep and steady. "Lost, are ye?" he asked, his words carrying the weight of years spent on the road. You shook your head, no longer sure if you were lost or if the world simply had yet to find its way to you. "Not lost. Seeking." "Ah, seeking then. Seeking what?" He stepped closer, his hand resting on the hilt of a worn blade that hung by his side. It wasn't a threat, just a quiet readiness. "Stories," you replied simply, and the words seemed to settle between you, heavy with meaning. The man's eyes flickered with recognition, a strange light in them. "Stories? What stories?" You could feel the flame inside you shift at the question, its warmth growing brighter. These were the ones who might hear. These were the ones who might understand. "I carry the stories of the forest," you said softly, your voice more steady than you had intended, but the words felt right. "The stories of those who have come before, of the lives lived in the shadows of the trees. The ones who are forgotten, who never had a voice." The man took a step back, his eyes narrowing slightly as though weighing your words. The others in the caravan began to gather around, drawn by the sound of the conversation. You could feel their curiosity in the air, a buzz of anticipation that echoed your own thoughts. They were waiting for something. Something to connect them to the past, to tie their lives to something larger than themselves. "You're a strange one," the man said after a moment, his tone less wary now. "But there's always room for a good tale around the fire. Come, share what you know." You nodded, your heart swelling with a sense of purpose. These were the people you had been searching for. The ones who would listen. The ones who needed to hear the stories of the forest, of the lives that had shaped the world, of the past that had never truly been forgotten. That night, as the stars filled the sky above and the fire crackled between you, you began to speak. The flame within you flared, and the stories of the forest flowed from your lips, winding their way into the hearts of those around the fire. You spoke of the guardians, the wanderers, the healers. You told them of the forest's pulse, of the memories it held, of the spirits who walked beside you. You told them of the light and the darkness, the balance of life and death, and the way the stories wove through the land like threads in a vast tapestry. The faces around the fire were rapt, their eyes wide with wonder, their bodies leaning forward, hanging on every word. The flame inside you burned brighter with each passing moment, feeding off their energy, their curiosity, their need for something beyond the mundane. And as you spoke, you realized that the forest truth was no longer just yours. It had become theirs as well. The wind picked up as the night deepened, the whisper of the trees carried on the breeze. It was as if the forest itself had crossed the distance and joined you around the fire, its voice now woven into the fabric of your own. The stories had not just been shared, they had been reborn. And in that moment you understood. The forest had given you its stories, but the world had given you its heart. You were no longer just the keeper of the flame, you were the bearer of its truth. And as long as the flame burned within you, the stories of the forest would never die. The fire crackled, its warmth enveloping you and the travelers gathered around it. You had spoken for hours, weaving the ancient tales of the forest, stories of forgotten souls, of creatures that walked the earth long before the rise of cities, of the delicate balance between light and shadow that the forest had preserved for eons. And as you spoke, the flame within you burned brighter. It felt like the stories were no longer just words. They were becoming real again, breathing life into the air, into the land, into the hearts of those who listened. The caravan members were entranced. Their faces, once marked with weariness from the road, were now alight with wonder. They hung on every word, each story painting a picture of the forest's wild beauty, its untamed power, and its unbroken cycles of life and death. It was a world they could scarcely imagine, and yet it felt so close, so real. As the night wore on, the fire cast long shadows against the trees that surrounded the camp, and the wind carried the scent of the earth, fresh and alive. The stars above shone brightly, their light unclouded by the pollution and noise of civilization. The land felt ancient here, untouched by the rush of time, and for a moment, you felt as if the forest itself had come alive around you, its spirit joining you by the fire. Then after a long pause, one of the travelers, a woman, her face soft and serene, her eyes full of a quiet wisdom, spoke. These stories, they've been lost for so long, haven't they? Why didn't anyone tell them before? Her voice was gentle, but it carried a deep undercurrent of curiosity, of something more. She seemed to look at you as if waiting for an answer that reached beyond the words. You looked into the fire, the flames reflecting in your eyes, and for a moment, you were silent. The question had been on your mind since you had first left the forest. Why had these stories been forgotten? Why had the flame of the forest, the stories of the spirits, remained hidden for so long? Had the world moved on too quickly, leaving behind the old ways? Had the forest's memory grown too dim to be noticed? It wasn't that they were forgotten. You began slowly, your voice carrying the weight of the answer that had been waiting to be said. It's that they were never meant to be remembered by just anyone. The forest is a living thing, a place of balance. Its stories are not just history, they are living truths, guiding the land, protecting the world. The flame that carries them, it chooses who holds it. It chooses when the world is ready to hear its story. The woman nodded, her eyes thoughtful. And now the world is ready? You glanced at the fire, watching the flames flicker and sway. The wind picked up again, rustling the leaves in the trees, and you felt the forest's pulse in your chest, a steady rhythm that had always been there, waiting for you to understand. I believe so, you said softly, but the path is not always clear. The flame may burn brightly, but it can also be extinguished if not carried properly. The caravan grew quiet as they absorbed your words. Some exchanged glances, others stared into the fire, lost in their thoughts. The stories of the forest were no longer just folklore. They were real, tangible, and with every story you shared, the flame in your chest grew stronger, clearer. But you could feel something else too, something that had been whispering at the edges of your awareness since the moment you first left the forest. A shadow. A presence that had not yet shown itself but lingered, watching. It was subtle, but it was there. The wind shifted, and the trees surrounding the camp seemed to groan, a deep, unsettling sound that reverberated through the earth. The fire crackled in response, and you felt the flame inside you flicker for a brief moment. There are those who will not welcome these stories. The voice was a whisper in your mind, familiar and yet distant. It was the voice of the forest, its warning. And as you looked around at the faces of the caravan, you realized that the world was not as ready as you had hoped. There were forces out there that would seek to silence the stories, to erase the flame you carried. The stories of the forest, of the old ways, were not just memories, they were truths that some might not want to face. The woman who had spoken earlier, whose eyes were still fixed on you, seemed to sense something too. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You didn't answer immediately. You felt the weight of the forest's ancient gaze upon you, its watchful eyes seeing further than you ever could. The forest had given you its stories, its memories, but it had also given you a warning. Not all paths are meant to be walked without caution, you said, your voice heavy with the weight of the knowledge you now carried. The stories are alive and not everyone will understand. Some will fear them. Others will seek to bury them, to destroy what they cannot control. The fire flickered again and a gust of wind swept through the camp, extinguishing the smaller flames in the fire pit for just a moment. The darkness closed in, and the air felt suddenly colder, as though the night had deepened into something far more ominous. The shadows at the edge of the camp stirred, as if moved by something unseen. The caravan members began to look around, uneasy, sensing the change in the air. The woman's brow furrowed, her gaze shifting to the surrounding woods. What's happening? A sudden crack of a branch breaking echoed through the trees. It was loud, sharp, unnatural. The travelers tensed, instinctively reaching for the weapons they had at hand. The night had gone still. And then, the silence was broken by a low, guttural sound. A growl, almost imperceptible, but chilling in its resonance. Your hand instinctively went to the hilt of the knife you carried, though you had not needed it in so long. The air was thick with tension, the stillness amplifying every sound, every movement. And then it came, something moving in the shadows too fast for the eye to track. A figure appeared, half hidden in the gloom at the edge of the camp. It was tall, its body elongated, its features obscured by the dark. It stepped forward, its presence filling the space with a sense of dread that washed over you like a cold tide. The traveler stood frozen, unsure whether to speak or move. You felt the weight of the moment settle over you like a heavy cloak. The flame inside you flared briefly, but the figure did not move closer. The figure's voice rang out, low, rasping, and ancient. You carry the flame, it said, its tone like dry leaves rustling in a long-forgotten grave. But it will not burn forever. The figure stepped forward again, its form becoming clearer, pale, gaunt, and twisted. Its eyes gleamed in the dark, glistening with a cold, malevolent intelligence. I am the one who keeps the stories buried. The one who ensures that the flame does not outlive its time, it hissed. And you, Keeper, you are far too late. A chill ran through you, and the flame inside you flickered again, as though it sensed the presence of something older, something darker, that had been lying in wait. The forest has its protectors, and some stories are not meant to be told. Your breath caught in your throat. This was no ordinary being. This was something older than the forest itself, a force that had existed long before the stories had been written down. It was the embodiment of silence, of forgetting, of erasure. The shadow that you had sensed earlier was not a mere whisper. It was here in the flesh. The travelers stood frozen, their eyes wide with terror, but you knew what had to be done. The flame that burned within you, the stories you carried, could not be extinguished. You had to protect them. You had to protect the truth. And so, with the flame of the forest pulsing within your heart, you raised your voice. Some stories cannot be forgotten, you said, your words steady despite the overwhelming fear that clutched at your chest. And some truths will not be buried. The figure's eyes narrowed, its lips curling into a twisted smile. We shall see, Keeper. We shall see. The figure before you loomed like an ancient shadow, its presence seeping into the very ground beneath your feet. It was as though the earth itself recoiled from it, the soil growing colder, the wind stilling. The caravan members around you seemed frozen, their fear palpable, their bodies stiff with uncertainty. Their eyes flicked nervously between you and the figure, unsure whether to flee or fight, but you could sense that their fate, your fate, was already decided. The stories must not be silenced. The words rang in your mind again, the echo of the forest's voice steady and clear. It had given you this power, this truth, and now it was time to defend it. The flame inside you flared briefly, responding to the threat, and the light seemed to grow stronger, casting long, flickering shadows around the camp. The fire in the pit crackled in defiance, sending sparks flying into the air, and you felt the warmth in your chest intensify. But the figure did not retreat. It stepped forward again, its elongated form moving like a wisp of smoke, its eyes gleaming with malice. It had no intention of leaving. This was no mere warning. This was a challenge. A test. I know what you are, Keeper, it said, its voice a low rasp like the whisper of dry leaves being crushed underfoot. I know your purpose. You carry the flame, but you cannot stop what is coming. The stories you protect are not yours to tell. They belong to the darkness, to the silence, and I am the one who ensures they remain buried. The shadows deepened around the camp, the trees bending and groaning as if responding to the figure's presence. It was as if the very forest was holding its breath, watching this confrontation unfold with quiet, eager anticipation. You could feel the pulse of the forest in your chest, but now it was not just a hum of life. It was a ripple of warning. Something ancient stirred in the depths of the earth, something far older than either you or the figure standing before you. The figure's eyes gleamed with an unsettling calm, and it smiled, though its smile was not one of kindness. It was a grin that spoke of something far darker. You think you are the keeper of the flame, but you are a fool if you believe you can protect these stories. They are already fading just as you will fade. I am the keeper of silence, the keeper of what must be forgotten. Its words were cold, and they seemed to seep into the air, hanging heavy around you like a fog. The travelers around you shifted uncomfortably, their hands instinctively moving toward their weapons, but they were powerless. This was no ordinary foe. It was something far older, something that lived between the cracks of history, a being that had existed long before the first stories were ever told. But you were not afraid. The flame inside you burned brighter. You had carried it through the forest. You had awakened its memories. And now it was your turn to protect it. Some stories cannot be silenced, the forest whispered again. Some stories must be told. You are wrong, you said, your voice steady, cutting through the tension in the air. These stories are not just memories. They are the truth. They are the flame that keeps the balance. You can't erase them. You can't bury them. The figure's eyes darkened, its grin widening, and for a moment, you thought you saw something flicker behind its eyes. Something primal, something ancient and terrible. The shadows around you seemed to deepen, the very air growing heavier with each passing moment. It stepped closer again, its movement slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. The truth is a fleeting thing, it hissed, its voice like gravel scraping against stone. What you call truth is just a story, a tale woven by time and memory. And memories fade, they wither, they die, just like the people who tell them. You could feel the air grow thick with its presence, its dark energy pressing against you, threatening to smother the flame inside your chest. But you would not let it. You could feel the forest pulse in your veins, the ancient rhythm of life and death that had sustained the land for centuries. You were not just a keeper. You were the bridge between the past and the future, between light and darkness. The figure raised a hand, and the air around you grew colder, the temperature dropping rapidly as if the very night itself had frozen in place. The wind stilled, and the shadows seemed to stretch, creeping toward you like dark fingers, attempting to smother the flame you carried. But you stood your ground. You placed your hand over your chest, feeling the warmth of the flame within, and you spoke the words that had been passed down through generations, the words that had been whispered by the spirits of the forest, the words that held the power to break the silence. The flame of memory cannot be extinguished, not by you, not by anyone. The moment you spoke those words, a wave of energy surged through you. The flame inside your chest flared brightly, burning with a fierce intensity. The darkness around you recoiled, as though the light itself was burning it away. The figure's form flickered for a moment, its shadowy outline wavering like smoke, but it did not vanish. It was not done yet. Fool, it snarled, its voice growing more shrill. You think your light can defeat me? You are nothing. You are just a keeper of stories, a collector of memories. You cannot stand against the silence. You cannot stop what is coming. But you felt the forest with you. The spirits that had whispered their tales to you now surrounded you, their voices rising in a chorus, a song of power, of defiance. The flame within you grew stronger, brighter. It burned with the energy of the forest, with the wisdom of the spirits, with the strength of 1,000 stories. You felt its warmth spread through your entire being, filling you with purpose, with power. The figure recoiled, its form flickering and warping as though it were being pulled apart by the force of the light you carried. It reached out, but its fingers seemed to pass through the air, as if they had no substance, no reality. The shadows around it twisted and writhed, but the light was stronger, pushing them back. You cannot stop me, the figure spat, but its voice was faltering, its power waning. You're wrong, you said, your voice firm, unwavering. The flame cannot be smothered, and neither can the stories. With that, you raised your hand toward the figure, and the flame within you exploded outward, a wave of light that washed over the figure, engulfing it in its brilliance. The shadows shrieked, but they could not withstand the light. The figure's form began to unravel, its edges fraying like cloth burning at the seams. The shadows shrieked as the light consumed them, the air crackling with energy. And then, with a final scream, the figure collapsed in on itself, disintegrating into nothingness, leaving behind only a wisp of smoke that vanished into the night. The fire at the center of the camp flared brightly as if reacting to the release of energy. The travelers blinked in shock, their eyes wide, their bodies still tense, but the danger had passed. The oppressive air had lifted, and the silence that had settled over the land seemed to dissolve, replaced by the normal sounds of the night, crickets chirping, the rustling of leaves in the wind. You exhaled slowly, your heart pounding in your chest. The flame inside you flickered softly, still burning with the energy of the forest, but the danger had passed. For now. The travelers gathered around, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. The woman who had spoken earlier stepped forward, her voice trembling. What was that? What did we just witness? You looked at the smoldering fire, the light that still burned within you, and then back at them. It was an ancient force, one that seeks to silence the stories, to erase the truth. But it has been defeated, for now. The woman nodded slowly, her expression serious. We don't fully understand, but we will follow you. We will carry these stories with us. We will protect them. We have seen the power they hold. The caravan members exchanged nods, their fear beginning to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of determination. They had seen what you carried, what the flame was capable of, and they understood the importance of protecting it. You were no longer just the keeper. You were the guardian of the flame. The stories of the forest were alive again, and now it was your mission to protect them, to carry them into the world, and to ensure that they would never be lost again. The path ahead was uncertain, but the flame was yours to bear. And with the world behind you and the stories at your side, you knew that the journey was just beginning. The fire flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the camp. The eerie chill that had once gripped the air faded, replaced by a quiet, uneasy calm. The wind had returned, rustling the leaves in the trees above, and the stars above you twinkled like distant witnesses to the events that had just transpired. The travelers stood around you, still processing the surreal events they had just witnessed. But despite the lingering fear in their eyes, there was something else now, something that had been forged in the heat of battle, in the weight of the stories you carried. They had seen the truth, and now they understood. The woman who had spoken before, the one who had seemed so serene, stepped forward once more. Her face was still pale, but her eyes were clearer now, steadier. She had seen something in you, something more than just the keeper of stories. She had seen the power of the flame, the strength of the legacy you bore. "How can we help?" she asked softly, her voice steady but filled with an unspoken weight. You looked at her, feeling the warmth of the flame inside you flicker gently. There was no time to rest. The figure, though defeated for now, was not the only threat. The stories you carried, the flame within you, were powerful and dangerous. There would be others who would seek to extinguish it, to bury it beneath the earth and forget it. You could feel it in the air, the tension that lingered like a storm on the horizon. "You've already helped," you said, your voice calm but firm. "By standing with me, you've shown that the flame can spread. But there's still much to be done. We cannot stay here. There are forces out there, ones that fear the truth. We must continue our journey." The travelers exchanged wary looks, but their resolve hardened. The woman nodded, stepping closer to you. "We will follow you, keeper, wherever the road leads." And so, as the fire died down and the first light of dawn began to touch the edges of the sky, you packed up your things and prepared to leave. The caravan had come together in the wake of the danger, a small, united group bound by the knowledge of what they had seen. They were no longer just wanderers, they were now part of the story. And you, the bearer of its flame, could not do this alone. The road ahead was uncertain. You had no clear destination, no map to guide you. But you knew this: wherever the road took you, the stories must be told. And you would not let them fade, not again. As you moved along the path, leaving the remnants of the camp behind, the forest gave way to rolling hills. The air grew crisper, the scent of pine and earth replaced by the sharp tang of wind-blown grass. The landscape was open here, the horizon stretching far into the distance. And yet, as you walked, a feeling of unease settled over you, as if you were being watched. The hairs on the back of your neck prickled, and every step felt like it was leading you into a deeper, darker place. The woman, who had become your closest ally in this journey, walked beside you. Her name was Lyra, though she had not shared much of her past with the others. There was something quiet and guarded about her, as if she had carried her own burdens, her own stories, before this journey had begun. But now, she seemed to walk with a sense of purpose, her eyes scanning the path ahead with a quiet intensity. "I've been thinking," she said after a long pause, "about what you said. About the darkness that seeks to silence these stories. Why would it want to? What does it stand to gain by erasing the truth?" You considered her question carefully, your thoughts shifting to the figure that had appeared in the night. The figure had been ancient, a manifestation of something darker than the forest itself, a force that sought to bury the past to keep the flame from reaching others. I don't know, you said finally, but I think it's afraid. These stories are more than just memories. They are the truth that binds the world together. The forest, the earth, the people, everything has a story. And when you erase those stories, you erase the connection. You weaken the land and you tear apart the balance. Lyra nodded, absorbing your words. So, if the stories are the truth, then what happens when we forget them? The world becomes a place of shadows, you replied softly. Without memory, without truth, we become lost. And the forest, the land, the people, they begin to wither. The stories are the threads that hold everything together. If they are lost, so is the world. The weight of those words lingered in the air between you, and for a moment, neither of you spoke. The wind carried the scent of the grass and the distant earth, but it felt like the world had grown heavier, as if the very land itself was holding its breath. As you walked on, the terrain began to change. The hills flattened out, and the road began to wind through a vast, open plain. The sky stretched above you, the endless blue broken only by the occasional cloud. There was a sense of freedom here, but also something else, a quiet, pervasive feeling of emptiness. The land felt barren, as though it had once been full of life but had been drained of it over time. Do you feel that? Lyra asked, her voice barely a whisper. You nodded, your senses sharpening. The flame within you pulsed in response, but it wasn't a welcoming warmth. It was a warning, a tremor deep inside you telling you that something was wrong. The silence of the plain was deafening. There were no birds in the sky, no animals stirring in the grass. The wind moved in eerie whispers, carrying with it a strange, metallic scent. The air felt thick, like it was charged with some unseen force. And then you saw it, a figure standing far ahead on the road. It was tall, cloaked in a dark, tattered garment that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its face was obscured, but its presence was unmistakable. It was watching you. The flame inside you flared. A deep instinct told you that this figure was no ordinary traveler. It was something darker, something that should not be here. The stories of the forest had spoken of such beings, creatures that fed on forgotten things, on lost memories, on silence. And you knew without a doubt that this was one of them. Who is it? Lyra asked, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know, you said, your heart pounding in your chest. But we need to keep moving. Slowly. You motioned for the caravan to fall back, urging them to remain quiet, to stay out of sight. The figure did not move as you approached, but you could feel its eyes on you, cold, unblinking. It was waiting. With every step you took, the land seemed to grow heavier. The air felt more oppressive, and the light seemed to dim, as if the very presence of the figure was drawing the life from the land. The flame inside you burned brighter, but you could sense that this figure, this shadow, was not something that could be easily banished. As you closed the distance, the figure finally spoke, its voice deep and raspy, like the sound of dead leaves being blown across an empty field. The stories you carry, it said, its words sharp and precise like daggers in the air. They are not yours to tell. They are my stories. And you are trespassing in a place you do not belong. You stopped, your feet planted firmly on the road. The flame inside you flickered, but you stood tall, refusing to be cowed. We are not trespassing, you said, your voice steady. The stories belong to the land, to the people, to the earth. They are not yours to claim. The figure's form wavered, as if the darkness surrounding it shifted. It stepped forward, its movements unnaturally smooth, like a shadow sliding across the ground. You think you can stop me? The figure hissed. You cannot. These stories are lost to time. They were never meant to be remembered. They belong to silence. And as it spoke, you felt the temperature drop sharply. The very air seemed to constrict, squeezing the life from your lungs. But you would not give in. You couldn't. The stories were too important. The flame was too vital. You reached into your heart, drawing from the very core of the flame within you, and you let it burn brightly. The light exploded from you, expanding outward in a wave, pushing back against the darkness, against the figure's presence. This light cannot be extinguished, you declared. The stories will be told. The flame will burn. The figure recoiled, its form flickering like a dying ember. We shall see, it whispered before vanishing into the wind, leaving only the faintest trace of its presence behind. The world seemed to breathe again. The land felt lighter and the oppressive silence lifted. The caravan let out a collective breath, their tension easing as the figure disappeared. But the path ahead was not clear. The battle was not over. You had defeated one shadow, but there would be more. The flame inside you had grown stronger, but the darkness was still out there, lurking in the corners of the world, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The world around you seemed to tremble in the wake of the shadow's departure, the air thick with the remnants of its presence. The winds, once still, began to stir, but the heavy weight of the encounter lingered in your chest. You could still feel the dark energy, a chill that seemed to crawl beneath your skin, like a reminder of how close you had come to losing everything. But the flame, your flame, had held strong. Lyra walked beside you, her face pale, her eyes reflecting the same unease that had settled deep within you. You could sense her questions, the silent doubts she had not yet spoken. She had seen things she couldn't fully understand. But more importantly, she had seen you, the Keeper. And perhaps now, more than ever, she knew just how much was at stake. "Who was that?" she asked softly, her voice barely above the wind's whisper. "What do they want with the stories?" You glanced at her, noticing how the land seemed to stretch before you, endless and unyielding, a vast emptiness that stretched toward the horizon. The figure that had confronted you was part of a darkness you had only just begun to understand. It had been a creature of the forgotten, a being that existed between memories, between the cracks of the world. It lived off silence, off the stories that were never told. "I don't know," you admitted, the uncertainty in your voice betraying the weight of the truth you were still grappling with. "But I think it's something older than we can comprehend. It feeds on the forgotten. It wants to erase the stories, make sure they are never told again. And that's why we have to keep moving forward. The flame inside me, inside all of us, is the only thing that can push back the darkness." You spoke with a conviction that you didn't fully feel. The reality was, the more you encountered this force, the more you realized that your journey was not just about protecting the stories, it was about preventing the world from forgetting them entirely. Without those stories, the world would slip into oblivion. Without memory, there would be no light, no truth. Lyra nodded, though there was a shadow of doubt in her eyes. "So, we just keep moving? Keep telling the stories, even if it means facing things like that?" You glanced back at the horizon, the road ahead still uncertain. The land was flat now, the hills and trees replaced by an open expanse of dry grass and sparse clusters of twisted bushes. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, stretching shadows that felt too deep, too dark. "Yes," you replied quietly, "even if it means facing things like that. But we won't be alone. As long as we carry the flame, others will help us. Others will hear the stories. And that's the key, we can't let the flame go out." You were not just protecting the stories of the forest anymore. You were protecting the memory of the world itself. The stories were threads in the tapestry of existence. Without them, there would be nothing but silence. The caravan, a motley collection of travelers, merchants, and wanderers, had gathered around the fire that night, as they always did, huddled close in the fading warmth. They were waiting for you to speak, to share the next chapter of the stories that now connected you all. Their eyes were filled with an unspoken understanding, and yet there was still fear. Fear of what lay ahead. Fear of the forces that lurked beyond the horizon. You sat down beside the fire, and the others followed suit, the crackling of the flames the only sound for a long while. The stars above shimmered, but there was a coldness in their light, as though they too had witnessed something terrible and were now uncertain of what would come next. The warmth from the fire was comforting, but it felt fragile, like it could be snuffed out at any moment by the forces that you now knew were hunting you. You felt it in the way the air shifted, like a shadow creeping over the land, moving closer inch by inch. "The stories must not be forgotten," you said, your voice steady despite the weight of everything that had happened. "I know it feels like we're running, that we're hiding. But this flame, the flame of memory, is our only defense. We cannot allow the silence to consume what we have." One of the travelers, a tall man with graying hair and worn, leathered skin, spoke up. "But how do we fight what we can't even see?" His voice trembled slightly, and you could tell that the journey had worn him down. He had seen too many dark things already, too many horrors that had left scars deeper than his body could ever show. "What if we can't hold on to the stories? What if they fade? What if the darkness just takes them?" You turned to him, your gaze meeting his tired eyes. You had seen the fear in them before, but this was different. This was the fear of being swallowed by something beyond comprehension, and you understood it all too well. "You've seen what the darkness can do," you said softly, your voice carrying a quiet strength. "But we have something it doesn't. The stories are alive, and they want to be heard. As long as we keep telling them, as long as we keep the flame burning, we keep the darkness at bay." The others nodded, though their expressions remained uncertain. You could feel the weight of their doubt, but you couldn't afford to let it fester. You had to inspire them, to make them believe in the power of the stories, to remind them why they had come this far. It's not just about survival, you continued. It's about remembering, about keeping the world alive with the stories that shape it. And those who walk this path with us, they carry something more than just a flame, they carry the truth. There was a long silence after that, and you could feel the weight of the words settling over the camp like a heavy blanket. Slowly, the travelers seemed to relax, though their unease never truly left them. They were afraid, but there was also something else, something stronger than fear. It was the quiet acceptance of the truth you had spoken. "We'll carry the flame with you, Keeper," Lyra said quietly, her voice firm now. "We'll make sure the stories are told." The others nodded in agreement, their resolve strengthening in the light of your words. You could feel the shift, the sense that something had changed in the very air. They were no longer just following you, they were now part of this journey. They were part of the flame. And so, as the fire crackled and the night deepened, you began to tell the next story, the story of a time long before the forest had taken root. You spoke of the ancient ones, the first wanderers who had walked the earth when the world was still young. You spoke of the stars, of the spirits that lived in the wind, of the creatures that had once roamed free across the land. You told them of the bond between the earth and the sky, the balance that had been maintained for eons. As you spoke, the flame inside you grew brighter, filling the camp with a soft, steady light. The stories flowed easily now, as if they had always been there, waiting for the right moment to be told. And you felt something shift within you, a deep sense of connection to the world you had once known, an understanding that the forest, the land, and the stories were all part of the same great whole. But even as the stories continued, you could feel the shadows moving again. The night was not as quiet as it seemed. There was something else out there. Something that was watching you from the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. The journey ahead was far from over. The flame you carried burned brightly, but there were still many challenges to face, many stories to be told, and many shadows to confront. And as the night grew deeper, you realized that your journey had only just begun. As the fire flickered and crackled beneath the vast night sky, you could feel the weight of the world shifting. The stories you had shared, the light of the flame inside you, had brought a fragile peace to the camp. The travelers huddled closer now, the warmth of the fire providing the only comfort against the cold that seemed to gnaw at the edges of the world. But the darkness outside the firelight seemed to linger. There was an unsettled air to the night, an oppressive silence, like the land itself was holding its breath. The wind had died down completely, and the stars above no longer shone with their usual brilliance. Instead, they flickered weakly, like dying embers in a forgotten hearth. The world seemed to be watching, waiting for something. You couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The figure you had encountered on the plains, the one that had sought to erase the stories, was still out there, its presence a lingering shadow like an old wound that refused to heal. Its warning echoed in your mind, "You think you can stop me? You cannot. These stories are lost to time." The words cut through you like a knife, a constant reminder of the battle that lay ahead. The flame inside you pulsed in response, growing stronger with each passing moment, but you knew that it alone would not be enough. The road was long, and the shadows that pursued you were not easily vanquished. Lyra sat across the fire from you, her eyes heavy with thought. She had been quiet since the encounter with the shadow, her gaze often drifting toward the horizon, as if searching for something in the dark. The others, too, had fallen into a somber silence, their eyes wide with the unspoken fear that had settled over the camp. They were no longer just travelers, they were now part of something much larger, something they couldn't fully understand. "I don't like it," Lyra spoke suddenly, her voice low but urgent. "The way the land feels. The stillness. It's unnatural." You nodded, feeling the same unease gnawing at your insides. "It's as if the earth itself is waiting for something. And I fear it's not something we can control." The wind picked up again, though it was colder now, carrying with it a strange, distant hum, almost like a faint whisper. It was a sound you hadn't heard before, one that sent a shiver down your spine. The flame in the fire danced wildly, as if responding to the unseen presence that moved in the air. "Maybe it's not just the stories they want to erase," Lyra said, her voice thoughtful. "Maybe they want to erase us, all of us, and everything we've learned, everything we remember." Her words hit you harder than you expected. The thought had crossed your mind before, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel real, tangible. The road ahead was not just dangerous, it was a battle for the very nature of existence. The stories were the lifeblood of the world, but there were those who wanted to sever that connection. Those who would stop at nothing to wipe the slate clean. "You might be right," you said softly. But if we give up now, if we stop, then the darkness wins. And I won't let that happen. Not after everything we've been through. A long, heavy silence followed. The fire crackled, but its warmth felt distant now, as though it too was unsure of its place in the world. The wind howled in the distance, carrying with it the faint echoes of something else, a sound like the rustling of dead leaves or the creaking of ancient wood. It was a sound that carried no life, only decay. You stood up slowly, your eyes scanning the night. There was something out there, something more than just the wind, more than the shadow you had faced. The darkness was gathering. You could feel it in your bones. "We need to move," you said, your voice firm. "We can't stay here. The land is changing. We've overstayed our welcome." Lyra nodded immediately, her eyes sharpening. She had sensed it too. The others, though tired and wary, followed suit, gathering their belongings in silence. The flickering light of the fire cast long, creeping shadows across the ground, and you knew that there was no turning back now. The flame was still with you, but it was only a small spark in a growing sea of darkness. The road stretched out before you, an endless expanse of dry grass and scattered stones. The plains were silent, save for the faint hum that now seemed to come from the very earth beneath your feet. It was as if the land itself was alive, breathing in rhythm with the darkness that threatened to consume it. As you walked, you couldn't shake the feeling that you were being followed. Every time you turned, the shadows seemed to shift just out of view, their presence heavy in the air. The wind carried faint whispers, too soft to understand but too clear to ignore. The flame within you flickered in response, its warmth growing colder the farther you traveled. It was as if the very land was fighting against you, trying to extinguish the light you carried. Hours passed in uneasy silence. The landscape began to change again. The plains began to give way to twisted trees, their gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. The air grew thicker, and the sun, though still high, seemed to lose its warmth, as if the light itself were retreating from the encroaching shadows. And then, in the distance you saw it, a figure standing motionless in the middle of the road. At first, you thought it might be a traveler, another lost soul wandering the barren land. But as you drew closer, the figure didn't move. Its features were obscured by a hood, and its body seemed to blend into the shadows surrounding it. It stood perfectly still, like a sentinel, waiting for you to approach. "Who are you?" Lyra called out, her voice sharp, though tinged with wariness. The figure did not answer. Instead, it raised a hand slowly, pointing toward the horizon. You followed the gesture, your gaze locking onto what it indicated, a thick, swirling mist that had begun to creep across the land, rolling in from the far side of the plains. The mist was unnatural, its color an eerie green, and it seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. As you watched, the mist seemed to draw nearer, swallowing everything in its path. "It's coming," Lyra whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Whatever this is, it's coming for us." The figure, still unmoving, lowered its hand and took a slow step back, its form dissolving into the shadows as if it had never existed. The mist continued its relentless approach, its tendrils of fog snaking toward you with increasing speed. You felt the flame within you stir, a flicker of warmth deep in your chest. It was responding to the mist, the air growing thick with energy as the land itself seemed to pulse with power. The stories had always spoken of a force like this. Something ancient, something that had slept for centuries, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And now that moment had come. The travelers around you began to move quickly, their pace quickening as the mist approached. There was fear in their eyes, but there was also a resolve that hadn't been there before. They had seen the darkness firsthand now, and they were no longer just following you, they were part of this fight. "Move," you commanded, your voice sharp as you turned toward the mist. "We need to get through it. Keep moving forward." The flame inside you burned brighter, but it was struggling against the overwhelming pull of the fog. It felt as though the mist itself was a living thing, swallowing the light, dimming everything in its path. The stories of the forest, the memories of the earth, all seemed to be fading as the mist closed in. But you couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the darkness was so close. "Stay close," you shouted, urging the caravan forward as the mist crept ever closer, its cold fingers brushing against your skin. "The flame will guide us." But even as you spoke, you could feel the pull of the mist, the weight of the forgotten stories tugging at you. The land itself was becoming a graveyard, and the mist was the tombstone. The journey ahead was becoming a race against time. The stories were alive, but the mist sought to smother them. It sought to erase the truth. And as the land around you faded into the fog, you realized that this was no ordinary force. This was the edge of the world, the boundary between memory and oblivion. and you were the only one standing between the two. The mist swirled around you, its cold fingers creeping ever closer, dragging with them an air of unrelenting silence. It wasn't just a fog, it was a presence, something alive, something ancient, with the power to unravel the fabric of memory itself. Every step you took felt heavier, as though the very land beneath your feet was beginning to disintegrate, consumed by the creeping fog. The flame inside you flickered uneasily, struggling to maintain its light in the face of the growing darkness. The air grew thick, oppressive, as if the fog itself was made of forgotten things, memories that had slipped through time and stories lost to the void. Every breath you took seemed to catch in your throat, filled with the taste of ash and decay. "Keep moving," you shouted, your voice cutting through the dense air, but it felt hollow, like the fog was swallowing your words even as they left your mouth. "Stay close, stay together." Lyra was beside you, her face pale and tense, her eyes darting around as though searching for any sign of hope. The others had fallen into line, their steps quick and uneven, their faces drawn with fear. The mist pressed in from all sides now, a wall of white that seemed to stretch endlessly, blotting out the horizon and the sky, leaving only the ground beneath you. It was as though the world had been reduced to nothing but the fog and the road that led through it. "Is it just me?" Lyra whispered, her voice strained. "Or does it feel like we're walking into something?" You nodded grimly. There was no doubt about it. The path ahead was a descent, not just through the physical world, but through something much deeper, more insidious. The mist was a barrier between worlds, a veil between memory and oblivion. The stories you carried were the only thing keeping you grounded, but the fog was trying to steal them, suffocate them as it had done with the land. The travelers moved faster now, their pace quickening as the fog thickened. It was as though something deep in their instincts had shifted. They were no longer just following. They were running, driven by an instinct to survive, to escape the weight of the fog that pressed down on them like an invisible hand. But with every step you took, you felt it. The mist was not just swallowing the landscape, it was swallowing the stories too. The ground beneath you seemed to change. The familiar path was no longer there, replaced by a dull, featureless expanse. The trees, which had once stood like silent sentinels, now seemed to disappear into the fog, their twisted branches lost in the pale whiteness. The air was so thick that it felt like you were moving through water, the pressure of the fog pushing against you with every breath. "Where are we?" one of the travelers asked, his voice tight with panic. He had fallen behind, his steps faltering as the fog seemed to grow heavier around him. "What's happening?" You didn't answer right away. You couldn't. Your mind was racing, your heart pounding. The fog wasn't just a barrier, it was a presence, a force that had power over the land and the stories. It knew what you were carrying. It knew what you were protecting. And it wanted to erase it. You could feel the pull of the fog, tugging at your memories, at the stories you had told, trying to drag them into the void. The flame inside you flared briefly, a beacon against the darkness, but even its light seemed to be shrinking in the face of the overwhelming mist. It felt like the land itself was fading, its pulse weakening, its heartbeat slowing. "We need to hold on to the stories," you said, your voice trembling slightly as the fog closed in tighter. "Hold on to the flame. The stories are the only thing keeping us here. We can't let it take them. We can't let it take us." But as you said it, you felt the weight of your own words. You could feel the stories slipping, fading from your mind, as if the mist was slowly erasing them one by one. The names of the old spirits, the legends of the forest, the tales of the first wanderers, they were blurring, becoming indistinct. The flame inside you sputtered, fighting against the pressure of the fog, but it was growing weaker. The wind had died. The rustling of the trees, the songs of the birds, the whispers of the earth, all of it was gone. The world had been reduced to a fog-choked silence, a barren landscape where nothing seemed to matter except the creeping fog that threatened to devour everything. "We're losing them," Lyra said, her voice hoarse as she grabbed your arm, her grip tight. "We're losing everything." You looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening, but all you could see was the thick, suffocating white that surrounded you. The others were still moving, but their steps were faltering, their faces drawn with terror. The mist had begun to creep into their minds too, clouding their thoughts, their memories. The flame that had burned so brightly was now a dim, flickering light, as fragile as a candle in the wind. "Keep walking," you ordered, though your voice wavered. "Don't stop. Don't let it take you." But despite your words, you could feel the pull of the fog. It was like a weight on your chest, pressing down on your heart. The memories were fading faster now, slipping away like sand through your fingers. You tried to hold on, tried to remember the names of the spirits, the tales of the forest, but they were slipping from your mind, leaving behind a cold emptiness. The path ahead seemed to vanish, swallowed by the fog. The travelers had stopped moving, their eyes wide with confusion, fear, and desperation. They were no longer following the road, they were lost. "We can't go on like this," one of them whispered, their voice shaking. "We have to stop. We're not getting anywhere." You opened your mouth to respond, but the words caught in your throat. It wasn't just the path that had vanished, it was the very fabric of the world around you. The land, the trees, the fire, everything that had made up the world you knew, was slipping away, lost in the fog. The flame inside you burned weaker, weaker still, its warmth fading. Then, amidst the swirling white, you saw something. A figure. A silhouette, standing in the distance, barely visible through the fog. It was tall, its features shrouded in shadow, but there was no mistaking its presence. It was them, the same dark figure you had encountered on the plains. The one that had warned you of the darkness that sought to silence the stories. And now it had returned. The figure didn't move, but you could feel its gaze on you, cold and unwavering. The flame inside you flared again, struggling against the suffocating pressure of the fog, but it was growing weaker by the second. The figure's voice broke through the silence, low and raspy, like the sound of leaves being crushed underfoot. "You think you can escape?" it hissed. "You think your stories matter? They are nothing. Just whispers in the wind, destined to fade." "No," you replied, your voice hoarse, barely audible. "The stories are everything. They are the truth, and I will not let you take them." The figure tilted its head, its dark form flickering like a shadow in the mist. "You will fail," it whispered. "You have already failed. The stories are slipping from your grasp, Keeper. The darkness has come, and you are alone." But in that moment, something inside you snapped. The flame inside you ignited with a renewed fury, burning hotter than ever before. You could feel it deep in your chest, a surge of warmth, of power, of defiance. The stories were alive. They were more than just memories, they were the pulse of the world itself, the heartbeat of the earth. They were the key to everything, and you were the keeper of them. "No," you said again, this time with more strength. "I am not alone." With that, you raised your hand, holding the flame high. It burned bright, brighter than ever before, a beacon in the fog, a light that refused to be extinguished. The darkness recoiled, its form flickering as though it could not withstand the heat of the flame. The mist began to thin, the weight lifting from your chest as the stories fought to reclaim their place in the world. The figure in the distance shrieked, its voice like 1,000 dying whispers, but it could not withstand the light of the flame. The fog began to dissipate, slowly at first, then more quickly, as though the very air was being swept away by the force of your defiance. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the mist began to vanish, the world returning to clarity. The trees reappeared, their gnarled branches swaying gently in the wind. The road beneath your feet solidified again, and the stars above began to twinkle once more, their light steady and clear. The flame inside you still burned brightly, its light filling the world with warmth, with life, with stories. But you knew the battle was not over. The darkness would return. The forces that sought to silence the truth would never stop. And so you walked forward, the flame burning brightly in your chest, ready for whatever came next. The mist had receded as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind an unsettling calm. The land, though returning to its familiar shape, felt different, less alive, less vibrant. The trees stood tall, their branches twisting into the sky, but the air between them was heavy, thick with the remnants of the darkness you had just fought off. The stars twinkled overhead, their light no longer the cold, distant glimmer it had been, but a beacon of hope, steady and sure. Yet the weight of the battle was not gone. The travelers around you were still reeling from the encounter, their faces pale, eyes wide with the lingering fear of the fog. The flame inside you burned brighter now, its warmth spreading through your chest like a heartbeat, steady, resolute, yet fragile in the face of what you knew was still out there. "Are we safe now?" one of the travelers asked, his voice cracked with fatigue. He had been with you since the beginning of this journey, a quiet man whose eyes had once held a certain optimism. Now they were filled with doubt, as though the fog had taken something from him, something he might never get back. "No," you answered quietly, the word hanging heavy in the air. "We are not safe. Not yet. Not while the darkness still seeks to erase the stories." Your words felt like a cold slap in the face, but they were the truth. The mist had been just a symptom of a far deeper malady, something older than even the forest itself. A force that existed outside of time, beyond the stories, lurking in the cracks between worlds. The figure you had faced, the one who had sought to erase you, to erase everything you carried, was still out there, still waiting for the right moment to strike. You could feel it. The air around you had changed. The very land beneath your feet seemed to pulse with an uneasy energy, like a beast that had been wounded but was not yet slain. The flame inside you was strong, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. We need to move, Lyra said, her voice steady, though her eyes held the same unease that had settled in your chest. We can't stay here. Not with it still out there. She was right. The mist may have cleared, but the shadows lingered. You had faced one manifestation of darkness, but you knew that the figure you had encountered was only the beginning. The mist had been a manifestation of something far deeper, something that wanted to undo everything you were trying to protect. The stories were the lifeblood of the world, and without them, everything would unravel. The flame inside you pulsed, and you could feel the stories stirring, long-forgotten memories, ancient tales, the heartbeat of the earth, all waiting to be told. But each time you reached for them, the darkness tugged back as if trying to drag them back into the void. You could hear whispers, faint but growing louder, echoing in the corners of your mind. They're not just stories, you murmured, more to yourself than anyone else. They are the truth that binds everything together. And if we lose them, if they're erased, everything will fall apart. Lyra stepped closer, her hand resting gently on your shoulder. Her touch was reassuring, but the weight of the world seemed to be pressing down on you, as though every step you took was a step deeper into a place you couldn't escape. We won't let that happen, she said firmly, her voice filled with resolve. We'll help you. We'll carry the stories with you. We'll make sure they live on. The others gathered around, nodding in agreement. Despite the fear that still lingered in their eyes, there was something else, something stronger, written in their faces now. They weren't just following anymore. They were part of this, part of the flame, part of the fight to keep the stories alive. You nodded slowly, a deep breath filling your lungs as you tried to steady yourself. The road ahead was uncertain. You didn't know what lay beyond the trees, beyond the horizon. But you knew this, as long as you carried the flame, as long as you kept the stories alive, you would have a chance. We move at dawn, you said, your voice steady. The road ahead is long and we'll need every ounce of strength we have. We can't afford to stop. Not yet. The others nodded, and without another word, they began to prepare for the journey ahead. You sat down by the dying fire, your mind racing with the weight of everything you had learned. The flame inside you burned brightly, but the road was still shrouded in uncertainty. The night was quiet, but not peaceful. The land seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something. The shadows of the forest stretched long across the ground, creeping and twisting like sentient things. Even the stars above seemed to flicker nervously, their light dimmed by the oppressive weight of the unknown. It wasn't just the darkness that sought to erase the stories. It was something worse. Something ancient and eternal, lurking at the edges of reality, waiting for the right moment to break through. The mist had been only a warning. The others were asleep now, their faces calm but worn. Lyra had taken a seat next to you, her eyes scanning the horizon, though there was little to see beyond the thick forest. The stillness around you was suffocating, as if the world itself was on the edge of something vast and terrible, just out of reach. I can feel it, you said suddenly, breaking the silence. The weight of the stories. They're still with us, but they're fading. Every moment we wait, every step we take, they slip further from our grasp. Lyra turned to you, her gaze sharp. We can't let that happen. Not after everything we fought for. You nodded, your thoughts a tangle of confusion and fear. But I don't know how much longer we can keep them alive. The darkness, it's relentless. It wants to erase everything. And sometimes, it feels like we're the only thing standing between the world and oblivion. You're not alone, Lyra said softly. We're with you. And we won't let the stories die. Her words, though comforting, did little to calm the storm that raged in your chest. You could feel it, something was coming. Something worse than what you had already faced. The stories were slipping and you were losing your grip on them. Suddenly, a sound broke through the quiet night, faint at first but growing louder, more distinct. It was a soft scraping noise, like the dragging of something heavy across the ground. You tensed, your heart racing. The flame inside you flared in response, its light flickering nervously. What is that? Lyra whispered, her voice tight with fear. The sound grew louder, closer now. It was coming from the direction of the trees, from the deep shadows where the moonlight barely reached. It was a slow, deliberate sound, unnatural. And then you saw it. A figure, dark and indistinct, moving between the trees. It was tall, almost impossibly so, its shape shrouded in shadow, its features hidden by a veil of darkness. The air around it seemed to ripple, as though it were warping the very space it occupied. The flame inside you flared, but this time it was not enough. The figure moved closer, its form becoming more solid, more defined. There was no sound but the scraping, the dragging. It was as if it was made of the darkness itself, a being born from the very fog you had just escaped. It stopped at the edge of the camp, its form now visible. Its face was a mass of shifting shadows. No eyes, no mouth, just a void. But you felt its presence, its gaze as though it was staring directly into your soul. "You think the stories are enough?" It hissed, its voice like the scraping of stone against stone. "You think you can keep them alive? You will fail. All of you." You stood, heart pounding in your chest, the flame inside you burning brighter in defiance. "I will not let you take them. The stories are alive. They belong to the world." The figure chuckled, the sound hollow like the wind passing through a dead tree. "The world is already lost. You are only delaying the inevitable." The mist had returned, swirling at the figure's feet as if it were a part of it. And as it stepped forward, the darkness spread, creeping into the camp, swallowing the light of the fire. But this time you weren't alone. The flame inside you surged, stronger than ever before, filling the air with its light. The stories were alive, and no matter what came for them, you would fight. The air around you had thickened, each breath a struggle against the oppressive weight of the unseen force that was slowly creeping through the camp. The flame within you flickered, struggling to remain steady in the face of this new darkness. It was as if the night itself had come alive, stretching its long, twisted fingers to smother the light, to drown the stories you carried. The figure before you, dark and shifting, was no longer just a presence. It was a force. It was the manifestation of the very thing you were fighting against. Oblivion. For a moment there was silence. A deep, suffocating stillness that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the land itself. The campfire, though flickering valiantly, seemed to shrink under the pressure. The mist, like an ancient, living thing, curled around the trees, creeping closer and closer, threatening to envelop everything in its reach. But you could not afford to be passive. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. You were the keeper of the stories, and the flame inside you, though it flickered, was still burning. And as long as it burned, you would fight. The figure in front of you shifted again, its form bending and warping in the air, like shadows tangled in the fabric of reality itself. It stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, each step sending ripples through the air as if it was not entirely of this world. The mist, ever creeping, followed it like a loyal servant, winding through the camp like an encroaching tide. "You are foolish to think you can stop this," the figure hissed, its voice a low, rasping whisper, as though it were coming from the depths of a cave. "The stories you carry are nothing but ghosts, fragments of a world that no longer exists. You cannot save them. You cannot save yourself." Your heart raced in your chest, the weight of its words settling over you like a cold shroud. It wanted to break you. It wanted to make you doubt. But you refused. You would not let it win. The flame inside you burned hotter, casting long shadows across the camp. It pulsed with a warmth that reached down to the very core of the earth, a flame that could not be extinguished. The stories were alive. They had always been. And you would protect them with every last ounce of strength you had. "I will not let you erase them," you said, your voice steady, though the weight of the darkness pressed against you. "The stories are the truth of this world, and they will never fade. Not while I still breathe." The figure seemed to grow, its form becoming even darker, more menacing. It was no longer just a shadow. It was the embodiment of every fear, every doubt, every forgotten moment that had ever slipped through the cracks of time. It towered over you, its form nearly eclipsing the campfire. Its voice, when it spoke again, was full of mockery, like a cold wind passing over a grave. "You are brave, Keeper," it said, its voice dripping with disdain. "But bravery alone will not save you. You cannot fight what has already been lost." You took a deep breath, grounding yourself in the flame. The stories were the foundation of the world, and they could never be lost. Not as long as you kept them alive. Suddenly, the ground beneath your feet trembled, as if the earth itself was shuddering in response to the figure's presence. The trees groaned, their branches swaying violently as the mist wrapped around them, turning them into dark silhouettes against the backdrop of the night. The wind began to pick up, but it was a cold wind, carrying with it the scent of decay and loss. The mist swirled, wrapping around your legs like an icy embrace, threatening to drag you into the darkness. You stepped forward, each movement heavy, as though the very air was trying to hold you back. The flame inside you flickered in response to the pressure, but it did not go out. It refused to go out. "You are not alone," Lyra's voice broke through the suffocating silence. She stood beside you now, her face pale but resolute, her eyes locked on the figure before you. "We're with you, Keeper. We'll fight. We'll keep the stories alive. One by one, the others began to gather around you, their faces filled with determination. Their fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it was not enough to stop them. They were ready to stand beside you to fight for the flame. The figure watched this display with a sneer, its form shifting and rippling like smoke in the wind. "You think you can stop me?" it rasped. "You think your fire, your stories can save you? They are already forgotten. You will join them." And with that, it raised its hand, and the mist surged forward like a tidal wave, engulfing the camp in an instant. The air turned cold, the temperature dropping rapidly as the fog pressed in, thick and suffocating. The flame inside you burned brighter in response, but it felt weaker, as though the mist itself was draining it. You felt the stories slipping. You could hear them, their voices faint, distant, as though they were being pulled into the void. The land around you began to fade, the shapes of the trees becoming hazy, the ground beneath your feet softening like sand. The world was slipping away. "No," you whispered, clutching the flame in your chest, holding on with all your might. "Not like this." The others were panicking now, their movements frantic as the mist closed in, clouding their thoughts, clouding their vision. The stories were becoming distant memories, fading with each passing second. The figure moved closer, its form now towering over you, its cold gaze fixed on your heart. "You cannot fight me," it said again, its voice full of finality. "You cannot fight time. You cannot fight the forgetting." But in that moment, something stirred deep within you, a memory, a story. A single thread, sharp and clear, cutting through the fog. It was a whisper, faint at first, but growing louder, stronger, like the wind rustling through the leaves of the trees. The stories were not gone. They had not disappeared. You remembered something. The stories were not just words, they were alive. They were the echoes of the world itself, woven into the fabric of existence. They were the breath of the earth, the pulse of the sky, the heartbeat of the stars. And you were not just a keeper. You were their protector. The flame inside you surged with renewed intensity, growing hotter, brighter, until it burned with the power of 1,000 suns. The mist recoiled, as though it had been burned by the very light of the stories it sought to erase. The figure shrieked, its voice a low, guttural cry as the flame pushed against it, driving it back. "You cannot have them," you said, your voice stronger now, the flame in your chest crackling with power. "The stories will live on, and they will fight you." The figure screeched again, its form warping and flickering as if it were made of smoke, unraveling before your eyes. The mist began to retreat, slowly at first, but then faster, as though the very air around it was burning away. You stepped forward, the flame in your chest now a steady, unwavering light, its warmth filling the camp. The others gathered around you, their eyes wide with awe and fear, but they were with you now. They could feel it, the power of the stories, the power of the flame. They knew this was not just about survival. It was about life. The figure wavered one last time, its form flickering like a dying ember, and then it was gone. The mist vanished with it, leaving only the night air, the still trees, and the crackling fire that continued to burn, strong and bright. But the battle was not over. The darkness would return. It always did. You could feel it deep in your bones. The world was still under threat. The stories, though they had survived this battle, were not yet safe. They were fragile like glass, and the cracks were beginning to show. You could hear their voices now, louder, clearer than before. The stories were alive, and as long as you carried them, they would fight to survive. You turned to the travelers, their faces filled with a mixture of fear, awe, and determination. "We are not done," you said, your voice firm and resolute. "The stories will survive, but we have to keep moving. We have to keep telling them. We have to keep the flame alive." And with that, you turned toward the dark horizon, the flame in your chest burning brighter than ever before. The fire crackled against the cold night, the only sound in the air besides the distant rustling of the trees. The mist had retreated, but its presence still lingered, a shadow that hung over everything, waiting. The light inside you burned bright, though now it seemed like a fragile flame fighting against the dark horizon. It was a reminder of everything you were protecting, and everything that still needed to be done. The figure that had emerged from the mist was gone, but its words echoed in your mind, twisting like a serpent. "You cannot fight time. You cannot fight the forgetting." Those words were like a wound that refused to heal. As long as there was darkness, as long as there were those who would seek to erase the stories, this battle would never truly be won. The travelers stood in a loose circle around you, their eyes flicking between the receding mist and the steady fire. Fear still clung to their faces, but there was something else there too, a sense of resolve. They had stood with you against the darkness, and they would stand with you still. The flame that burned within you was their only hope. "We can't stop now," Lyra's voice broke through your thoughts, calm and unwavering. "We've made it this far. We've already faced the worst of it." She was right. The world might be covered in shadows, but as long as the stories survived, there was hope. It was fragile, yes, but it was there. And you weren't about to let it slip away. Not now, not when the road ahead still called you forward. "Where do we go from here?" one of the travelers asked, a woman with fiery red hair who had remained silent through much of the ordeal. Her voice was tight, almost hoarse, but there was a determination in her eyes now. The road ahead was unclear. The path through the forest had once been a familiar one, but now it felt foreign, as though the land itself had been changed by the mist and the darkness. The stories you carried, the ones that had been with you since the beginning of this journey, were no longer just memories. They were living, breathing things. They were part of the land, part of the very fabric of the world itself. And yet, they were slipping, fading, as if time itself had decided to erase them. You took a slow breath, steadying yourself. The flame within you flickered again, its light bright but fragile. "We need to keep moving," you said, your voice steady, though every word felt like a weight in your chest. "There's a place far to the north, beyond the Great Hollow. It's said to be a place where the stories are kept, where they are protected. We have to get there. We can't stay here." The others looked at each other, uncertainty flickering in their eyes, but none spoke against your words. The path ahead was dangerous, but it was the only option. The stories were slipping away, and you couldn't afford to let them go. Not when there was a place that might save them. "We'll follow you," Lyra said, her gaze unflinching, her voice the strongest you had heard it. "We'll fight. We'll keep the stories alive." The fire burned brighter in your chest, the warmth of the flame a reminder of what you were fighting for. The road ahead would be long, treacherous, and filled with dangers. But the stories were worth it. They always had been. As the travelers gathered their things and prepared for the journey ahead, you felt a flicker of something deep inside you. A spark, a sense that the path forward was not just a fight for survival, but a mission, a purpose. The stories were more than just words, more than just fragments of forgotten memories. They were the heartbeat of the world. Without them, everything would fade into oblivion. The land around you was quiet now. Too quiet. The forest, which had once thrived with the sounds of life, was eerily still. Even the wind had stopped, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. "Keep close," you said, the words leaving your lips before you could even think. "Stay together. We can't afford to lose anyone." The others nodded, falling into line behind you as you began to move forward, leaving the remnants of the camp behind. The path was winding, overgrown, and narrow, the trees towering on either side like silent sentinels. The shadows beneath their boughs seemed to stretch and twist, following you with every step you took. The road that had once felt safe now seemed like an unfamiliar maze, a twisted labyrinth of uncertainty. The flame inside you burned brighter still, its warmth a steady companion, though it did little to ward off the growing chill in the air. The mist had dissipated, but the feeling of being watched never left. It was as if the world itself was aware of your presence, waiting for you to falter, waiting for the stories to be lost. For hours you walked, the ground beneath your feet growing softer, the trees more twisted, their roots creeping out of the earth like dark veins. The silence was broken only by the soft rustling of the leaves, the faintest whispers of wind. But it wasn't a comforting sound. It was a warning. The land was changing, shifting, reacting to the presence of the stories, to the flame inside you. And then, in the distance, you saw it. A light. It was faint at first, just a flicker, but it grew brighter the closer you got. It wasn't like the flame inside you, not like the fire you carried to keep the stories alive. This light was something different, an unnatural glow, flickering with an eerie pulse. It seemed to hover in the air, just beyond the reach of the trees, casting long, distorted shadows on the ground. You stopped, your heart racing, the flame inside you flaring in response to the strange light. "Do you see that?" one of the travelers asked, his voice tense. "What is it?" You didn't answer immediately. The light felt wrong. Like a beacon, a lure, a trap. But you could not afford to ignore it. If it was a sign, if it was a place connected to the stories, then you had to follow it. You had to know what it was. With a deep breath, you motioned for the group to move forward. Slowly, carefully, you approached the glowing light, your heart pounding in your chest. The air around you had grown colder, the ground beneath your feet softer, almost spongy, as though the earth was absorbing every step you took. The trees seemed to close in, their branches reaching out like claws, brushing against your skin as you passed. The light pulsed again, brighter now, its eerie glow casting strange shadows across the path. It seemed to draw you in, pulling you toward it with an invisible force. The flame inside you flickered wildly as though it sensed the danger. And then, as you stepped into the clearing where the light originated, you saw it. A structure. An ancient, crumbling stone building, half buried in the earth, its walls overgrown with vines and moss. The glow emanated from within, flickering through cracks in the stone like an ethereal flame. The building seemed abandoned, forgotten by time. But you could feel its power, its ancient energy, as though it had been waiting for you. "This is it," you whispered. "This is where the stories are kept." But even as you spoke, something stirred within the ruins. The air crackled with energy and the ground beneath you trembled slightly. A low, ominous hum echoed from deep within the stone walls, vibrating through your bones. You felt it before you saw it. A presence. A shadow. The feeling of something ancient, something that had been watching, waiting for you to arrive. And then it appeared. A figure, tall and gaunt, wrapped in shadows, emerging from the darkness of the stone building. Its eyes glowed faintly, the same eerie light that had drawn you here, as if it were made of the same substance, the same forgotten energy. "I've been waiting," the figure said, its voice low and cold, like the whisper of wind through dead leaves. "You are not the first to seek the stories, but you are the first to think they can be saved." The flame inside you burned fiercely, but it was not enough. The figure before you, though shrouded in darkness, exuded a power that felt ancient, older than time itself. "Who are you?" you demanded, your voice steady, though fear gnawed at your insides. "What do you want with the stories?" The figure did not move, its glowing eyes fixed on you. "I am the keeper of the forgotten. And you, keeper of the stories, have come to my domain. You believe you can save them. But they are already lost. The world is dying. And you cannot stop it." The flame inside you flickered, but you refused to let it go out. "I will stop you," you said, your voice fierce. "The stories will live on. As long as I breathe, they will not fade." The figure's laugh echoed through the clearing, a hollow, cruel sound. "We shall see." The night had deepened, wrapping the forest in a blanket of silence, save for the low hum that seemed to vibrate from the very air around you. The ruins before you stood like an ancient monument, their crumbling stone walls entwined with vines and moss, as though time itself had forsaken them. The figure, the keeper of the forgotten, stood at the heart of the structure, its eyes glowing faintly, as if it had come from the depths of memory, long buried and never to be spoken of again. A chill swept through you, a cold that cut deeper than the night air itself. It wasn't just fear that gripped you. It was the feeling that something older, something deeper, had begun to stir, a force that had been lying dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment to rise. You could feel the flame inside you, burning brighter with every heartbeat, its warmth fighting against the cold void that the figure's presence brought. But even as the flame flickered, you knew that the path ahead would not be easy. This was no simple shadow, no mere remnant of darkness. The keeper of the forgotten was a being of ancient power, one whose very existence had been intertwined with the fate of the stories, and with the fate of the world itself. "We've come to protect the stories," you said, your voice steady, though every word seemed to echo in the stillness of the night. "They are the truth of this world, and they will never be lost." The keeper's glowing eyes seemed to deepen, its form flickering like smoke. It tilted its head slightly, as though considering your words. Then it spoke, its voice a low, hollow sound that echoed from deep within the stone ruins. "The stories," it murmured, its voice both ancient and weary, "are not the truth. They are the echoes of a time long forgotten, a time that no longer exists. You believe you can preserve them, but you cannot. Everything fades. Everything is forgotten. The stories are the last remnants of a world that has already died." You felt the words like a blow to the chest. The keeper's voice carried with it a sense of finality, as though it had seen the end of everything and had accepted it as inevitable. Its gaze burned into you as though it was trying to pierce the very core of your being, to unravel the flame inside you, to erase it. But you stood firm. You would protect the stories. The flame inside you burned hotter, pushing back against the shadow that sought to smother it. "No," you said, your voice growing stronger. "The stories are the world. Without them, nothing exists. No memory, no history, no future. You can't take them. They belong to the land, to the people, to everything." The keeper's laughter filled the clearing, a cold, eerie sound that seemed to reverberate through the very stones around you. "You still don't understand. The stories are not yours to protect. They are not a gift nor a legacy. They are a curse." A cold shiver ran down your spine. The keeper's words were like daggers, cutting into the very foundation of everything you had believed. Could it be true? Were the stories not the lifeblood of the world, but a curse? Burden? The keeper took a slow step forward, its form shifting like smoke in the moonlight. The stories were never meant to be kept, it said, its voice low, almost mournful. They were never meant to be preserved. They are fragments of a dying world, stolen from the past, clinging to the future like shadows. But you, keeper, you have brought them with you. And now the curse is upon you. The ground beneath you trembled slightly, as though the earth itself was reacting to the keeper's words. The air grew heavy, thick with the weight of forgotten memories. You could feel it now. The stories, once vibrant and alive within you, seemed to waver as though their very existence was being threatened. The flame inside you flickered, its light dimming for a moment as a wave of doubt washed over you. No, you whispered, struggling to steady your breath to hold on to the flame. I won't let you erase them. I won't let you take them. The keeper's eyes narrowed, its gaze sharp and calculating. You cannot fight what has already happened. The stories are not your burden to carry. They are the remnants of a world that has passed. You cannot save them. They are already forgotten. And you, keeper, are nothing more than a fool who believes that he can change the past. The darkness around you seemed to shift, swirling like a storm in the distance, slowly creeping toward you, tightening its grip. The mist from before had returned, winding its way through the trees, its tendrils reaching out like the fingers of an unseen hand, drawing everything into its grasp. The world around you was beginning to fade. The trees were no longer solid, their twisted branches thinning as if they were made of mist. The ground beneath your feet was softening, becoming fluid, like sand slipping through your fingers. The flame inside you burned hot, but it felt smaller now, struggling against the pull of the darkness, against the cold weight of the keeper's curse. You could hear the whispers, faint at first but growing louder. The stories, once clear and vibrant in your mind, were now distant, slipping away, their voices muffled by the oppressive silence of the night. The curse was taking hold. Lyra stepped forward, her face filled with determination, but her eyes wide with fear. We've come this far, she said, her voice trembling but strong. We can't let it end here. The stories are what connect us, what make us who we are. They are worth fighting for. The others nodded, stepping in line behind her. They too were afraid, but they were not willing to let go of the stories. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. The keeper watched this with cold amusement. You think your defiance will change anything? It asked, its voice tinged with mockery. You think that your will can undo what has already been done? The world is forgotten. The stories are nothing. They will fade as everything does. And you will be left with nothing. The mist was growing thicker now, swirling around you in an impenetrable fog. The flame inside you flickered once more, threatening to go out, but you pushed back, gathering all your strength, willing the light to burn brighter. No, you said, your voice steady now, the doubt fading. The stories are not a curse. They are the light that binds us all. They are the foundation of everything. They are the truth, and I will fight to keep them alive. With that, the flame surged, brighter than ever before, its light cutting through the fog like a blade. The keeper's figure recoiled, its shadowy form flickering as though it could not withstand the brilliance of the light. The mist began to dissipate, pushed back by the strength of the flame, as though it was being burned away by the very fire that had kept you alive through this long journey. You cannot fight me, the keeper hissed, its form beginning to unravel, its voice no longer certain, but filled with a flicker of fear. You cannot hold the stories forever. They will be forgotten. You will be forgotten. The flame inside you burned hotter, the stories alive once more, their voices rising to fill the world. You could feel them now, the tales of the land, the whispers of the past, the truths of the earth. They were not fading. They were fighting back. We will not let you take them, you said, your voice rising above the keeper's words. The stories are the world's heartbeat, and as long as we fight, they will never fade. With a final surge of light, the keeper's form shattered, its voice a scream that echoed through the ruins, fading into nothingness. The mist, too, dissipated, vanishing like smoke in the wind. The land, though still dark, seemed to breathe once more, the earth solid beneath your feet. You were standing in the heart of the ancient ruins, the fire in your chest burning bright, stronger than ever. The stories were alive and you had won, for now. But you knew this was only the beginning.